Hey guys, tonight we're going to time travel into the deep, creaky bones of the American frontier, the place where comfort went to die, and survival meant dragging yourself through mud, snow, hunger, and occasionally mild bear-related trauma. You probably won't survive this, by the way. Not being dramatic, it's just statistically accurate. Most people didn't, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is over there. I like seeing how far this little campfire reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step down from the wagon, boots crunching into the coarse gravel of the last town anyone would call a town. This is it, your springboard into the unknown. Behind you, the buildings still stand with glass in their windows. There's the saloon with its lazy doors, the general store with one of those bells that rings every time someone with dusty intentions walks in, and maybe a small church, still smelling faintly of candle wax and desperation. Ahead of you, trees, grasslands, mountains, something between them and eternity. And you're supposed to live there now, somehow. The last outpost isn't much, but it's the final taste of civilization you'll get for a while. You've got your supplies, flour, coffee, salt pork, maybe a couple of tools, a rifle, some nails. No one told you how heavy flour sacks actually are, though, or how fast they rip open when handled wrong. You've also got the homestead deed, just a piece of paper saying this land is now yours if you can survive 5 years on it. Doesn't seem like a big ask until you actually try living through one. There's no road out to your new land, just a series of ruts worn into the earth by the hopeful and the doomed alike. You follow the trail on foot or, if you're lucky, in a rattling wagon that squeaks like it's haunted. Every bump in the path sends a jolt up your spine and you start to notice just how far away the horizon looks. The wagon ride itself is a trial, hot during the day, freezing at night, every part of your body either cramped or asleep. Your clothes are stiff, your mouth dusty, and your neighbours in the next wagon over have started singing to pass the time. At first, it's charming. By day 5, you fantasize about stuffing a sock in someone's mouth. Once you finally reach the edge of your land, it's not like it has a welcome sign or anything. It's a clearing, maybe, if you're lucky, or just a dense wall of trees. If someone lived here before, they didn't leave directions. You stop the wagon, climb down, and you stand there for a while, trying to imagine how a house could possibly exist here, because right now there is nothing. No fence, no field, no fire pit, just wind and weeds. That first night, you don't sleep much. The stars are brighter than anything you've ever seen. Too bright, really. They make the darkness below them feel endless. Every creak in the woods sounds like something with teeth. You hear a screech owl and nearly wet yourself. The fire crackles weakly as you sit on a rock, blanket around your shoulders, wondering what kind of idiot you were to think this was a good idea. There's no bathroom, no streetlights, and no backup plan. And then comes morning with the first rude slap of frontier survival. You're officially on your own. Your first order of business is figuring out where to build something, anything that'll keep the rain off and the wolves out. The process of choosing your home site is romantic in theory. In practice, it's a compromise between not too close to the swamp, not too far from the stream, and oh good lord, why are there so many mosquitoes here? You walk for hours trying to balance sunlight and shade, water and elevation. You step in a nest of fire ants. You fall into a hole. You yell into the woods out of sheer frustration. No one answers. The fringe truth most people don't know? A ton of frontier settlers didn't even make it this far. Some gave up before leaving town, some lost wagons, oxen or hope, and others got to their land, took one look and turned right back around. That rugged individualism people like to romanticize. Yeah, well, it came with a high casualty rate, and historians still debate just how many of these so-called pioneers were actually ready for what they were doing. Some were skilled, yes, former soldiers, trappers, or farmers used to hard work, but others, city folk with soft hands and big dreams lured by cheap land and puffed up promises. Letters from the time often read like a slow descent into madness. Dearest brother, the ground here is cursed, the water tastes of rot, and I haven't seen a decent loaf of bread in 7 weeks. That's not confidence. That's survival panic in cursive. So here you are, standing on your land, clutching your tiny bag of supplies, and trying not to think too hard about the distant howl you just heard echo through the trees. You've got maybe 2 weeks before the weather turns, maybe less, before something comes sniffing around your camp and no one's coming to help. There's no frontier rescue hotline. You either adapt fast or you become a cautionary tale. But hey, you've got a hat. That's something, right? You wake up with a crick in your neck and the vague sensation that something crawled into your clothes during the night. Your bed, if you can call it that, was a sad arrangement of bundled up coats on a ground that never quite stopped being damp. The fire went out hours ago. So your boots are frozen stiff and your hands feel like wood. You stretch or try to and groan as your spine makes more noise than the nearby creek. It's your first full day on the land and the honeymoon phase is officially over. Today's mission: find a spot to build shelter and build it fast. You can't sleep on the dirt every night. Well, you can, but not for long if you want to keep your sanity and internal organs functioning. You grab your axe, which feels heavier than it did yesterday, and begin to size up the trees. You've never looked at a tree and thought bedroom wall before, but welcome to your new life. No hardware store, no prefab lumber, no blueprint, just you, a couple of dull tools, and nature giving you the finger. The first swing of the axe is satisfying in a weirdly primal way. The second and third, less so. By the 10th swing, your hands are blistering and your shoulders are on fire. Trees do not fall quickly. They stand there for decades and do not take kindly to your eviction notice. Eventually, though, one gives way with a slow, dramatic groan and crashes to the earth with a thud that scares birds out of nearby branches and makes you jump. One down. Only a couple's dozen more to go. Here's the thing about log cabins. They don't build themselves, and they're not the simple stack a few logs and boom house situation Hollywood made them out to be. You have to notch each log, strip the bark, level the base, and figure out how to lift the walls without anything falling on your head. You don't have nails to spare, so you rely on wooden pegs or mud mortar to seal the gaps. Spoiler alert, the gaps never really seal. Your future home will whistle in the wind and house more insects than you ever thought possible, but it's better than nothing. Barely. As you work, sweat mixing with dirt, something unexpected starts to happen. You become slightly more efficient. Muscle memory kicks in and you start figuring out how to swing without wrenching your back. You learn to prop logs with leverage instead of brute force. You curse slightly less, and in the quiet between chopping and dragging you begin to hear the sounds of your land. Birds overhead, a squirrel chewing on something aggressively, the distant gurgle of a stream. For a few moments it's almost peaceful, but peace is temporary out here. You're constantly racing against time. Every hour spent cutting trees is an hour you're not making your roof waterproof or digging a root cellar. There's no handyman to call when your cabin leans slightly to the left. You just adjust your expectations. If it stands and doesn't leak too badly, it's a success. If it doesn't collapse while you're inside, it's practically a palace. What's weird is how different everyone's shelter looked. Some folks started with dugouts, literally holes in hillsides roofed with sticks and mud. Others used sod, stacking grass-covered earth into thick walls. Some didn't build at all, surviving weeks in tents or under makeshift tarps. There wasn't a one-size-fits-all model. There was only, can I build this fast enough to not die from exposure? Historians still bicker over how long it took settlers to get fully settled. Some say days, some say months. A lot depended on skill, weather, and sheer dumb luck. You drag another log into place, skin scraped and knees aching, and squint up at the sun. It's already heading west. You've barely gotten 4 logs high. At this rate, you'll be sleeping in a glorified wooden box for at least a week. You pause, chewing on a strip of jerky that tastes like smoked shoe leather, and imagine what your old neighbours back east are doing right now. Sitting down to dinner, maybe, lighting candles, reading by the fire. You try not to cry, mostly because tears would just attract dust. And while the standard historical image focuses on men building cabins, here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of the work fell on everyone. Women and kids weren't just hanging around picking daisies. If you could carry a log, you did. If you couldn't, you stirred the food, fed the chickens, or stood lookout. Every pair of hands mattered. And if you were alone, just a single soul on the edge of the world, you got creative or you didn't make it. That's the part people forget. Loneliness didn't just feel bad, it was deadly. Now here's a fringe detail for you. Many cabins weren't meant to last. They were thrown together as temporary survival boxes until settlers could saw proper lumber or establish a farm. Some were later abandoned when land proved infertile or neighbours turned out to be problematic or, wildly unhinged. In some places, archaeologists find dozens of cabin foundations clustered near streams, as if people just kept showing up, building and leaving like nature-themed speed daters. As the sun dips lower, your shadow stretches across the half-finished wall of your cabin. You scramble to throw together a fire ring, just a circle of stones, and light a few sticks before the dark completely sets in. Tonight, you'll sleep under your roofless framework, shivering beneath a blanket that still smells like mule. But the walls are up to your chest now. That's something. That's progress. Your hands are raw, your face sunburned, and you may have accidentally swallowed a bug during that last yawn, but you survived day one of building. You even managed to not crush yourself under a falling log. Gold star. And as you sit there watching the fire pop and hiss, you think about all the people who didn't make it past this stage. People who gave up, went home, or simply disappeared. You, though, you're still here. Still swinging, still stubborn. That counts for something. You wake up to rain. Not the gentle kind that makes poets swoon, but the kind that soaks your blanket, seeps into your socks, and drums on your skull like it's trying to knock. You didn't build a roof yet, not really, just a few slabs of bark propped at a hopeful angle. Turns out bark is not waterproof and hope is not insulation. The half cabin you were so proud of last night now looks like an abandoned project from a cursed summer camp. You sit up, squinting through the mist, your teeth clacking as cold air creeps into every joint. Building a log cabin is one thing. Living in it while it's half finished? That's the real frontier hazing. You wring out your shirt, jam your feet into stiff boots, and shuffle out into the grey morning to assess the damage. Mud everywhere. Your tools are damp, your firewood soggy, and a mouse chewed a hole through your only bag of flour. Frontier living, baby. So you double down. Time to finish the shelter, or at least get a roof over your head before the next cloud dumps its feelings on you. Every log you cut feels heavier today. Waterlogged, maybe. Or maybe it's just your arms, trembling with fatigue. You slip in the mud and faceplant directly into your future floor. Nothing like a mouthful of wet pine needles to remind you you're alive. You roll over, staring up at the sky like it's personally offended you, then force yourself back to your feet. Now comes the fun part. Figuring out how to raise the roof beams by yourself without dying. No pulleys, no friends, no OSHA. You wedge one end of the crossbeam onto a forked tree branch, balance the other on the wall, and say a quiet prayer. It holds, for now. Then you repeat the process again and again, your arms shaking so hard it feels like the trees are vibrating with you. And after several near-death experiences, some loud swearing, and one unfortunate splinter that goes way too deep, the skeleton of your roof is finally in place. Time for shingles. Except you don't have any. So you improvise. You peel bark from fallen trees, layer it like fish scales, and weigh it down with stones. Some people use split logs, others layered sod. You do what you can with what you have, which is mostly frustration and the creeping suspicion that this will leak anyway. Still, by nightfall, you have something resembling shelter. Not a good one, not a pretty one, but one that might, just might, keep your sleeping spot dry. Here's where the romantic myth of the log cabin really starts to unravel. Yes, it was a symbol of independence and frontier grit, but it was also wildly impractical. Notched logs don't fit perfectly. Gaps between them let in wind, rain, snow, and insects with no respect for personal boundaries. You stuff moss and mud between the cracks in a process called chinking, basically frontier caulking with whatever mush you can scrape from the earth. It helps, kind of, until a raccoon claws it loose at 2 a.m. and you spend the rest of the night swatting at phantom breezes and real bugs. And let's not forget the door. If you want one, you better build it yourself. You cut planks with a handsaw so dull it might as well be a butter knife. You tie the hinges together with leather straps or wire, if you have any. Most likely the door won't close properly. It'll sag or jam or creak like it's possessed. But it's a barrier. And on the frontier, any barrier is better than none. The roof still leaks, not much. Just enough to make a small puddle near your bedroll. You shift to the side. The puddle follows. Eventually you accept that your floor is alive and out to get you. Most cabins didn't have floorboards in the beginning anyway, just dirt. Cold, wet, occasionally worm-infested dirt. It wasn't until settlers had time, years, to cut and dry planks that the cabins got real floors. You have a blanket and some hay. Congratulations, but there's a certain pride in that too. Standing inside a structure you built from the land with your hands under your own stubborn will. It's crooked. It smells like damp wood and disappointment. But it's yours, and if you squint you can kind of picture a chimney in the corner. Maybe even a table someday. Maybe. Of course, not everyone had the same vision of a cabin. Wealthier settlers sometimes hired help. Yes, even out here. Or they moved into already built homes from previous waves of pioneers. Others shared cabins with relatives or neighbours until they could raise new ones together. The classic one-room cabin with a fireplace at one end and bunks at the other became a kind of template, but no two were exactly alike. Some were 8 feet square, others sprawled into multi-room lodges with lofts and porches, the McMansions of the frontier, if you will. And then there's the quirky bit. Some settlers, especially those from European backgrounds, brought their own building traditions with them, like Germans who built half-timbered homes, or Scandinavians who preferred turf roofs. Even the humble cabin had a surprising amount of cultural variety, depending on who was doing the chopping and stacking. But historical accuracy aside, your main concern tonight is staying warm. You coax the fire to life, blow on the embers until your eyebrows nearly singe, and set a tin pot of beans over the flames. The taste? Somewhere between ash and regret. But it fills your stomach, sort of. Then, and as you lean back against your not-quite-dry wall, you hear the wind change direction. A low groan pushes through the trees, and you swear you feel the cabin shiver. You glance upward. The roof holds, barely. The door rattles, but stays shut. You're tired, bruised, hungry, and vaguely damp in every possible place, but you're not exposed anymore. You have walls. You have something that counts as shelter. You're a little less likely to die tonight. And out here, that's a win. The first thing your stomach does when you wake up is complain. Loudly. Not in a polite, I missed breakfast kind of way, but in a low, growling, we're absolutely not doing this again tone. Yesterday's single tin of beans and one greasy piece of jerky just isn't cutting it anymore. Hunger has crept in, bold and uninvited, and now it's setting up camp. You roll over on your stiff bed of hay and wool and try to ignore it, but no dice. Today's task is clear. Find food. And not just any food, calories. Real, chewable, gut-satisfying calories. Easier said than done. You head out with a crude sack slung over your shoulder and your knife at your belt, eyes scanning for anything edible. The books back east always talked about bountiful wilderness, full of berries, roots, and gabes. Either those books were lies, or the bounty is hiding, because the reality in front of you is mostly twigs, suspicious mushrooms, and thorny bushes that threaten to stab your optimism to death. You find a patch of what might be wild onions, or might be the final thing you ever eat. That's the fun part of frontier foraging. One mistake and you're hallucinating in the dirt until the raccoons bury you out of pity. Eventually you find a few blackberries that aren't completely dried out, and some strange-looking green tubers that you vaguely remember hearing about from someone, maybe. You dig a few up, trying to imagine how edible they might be if you boiled them for 6 hours. For lunch, you eat half of one raw and immediately regret it. Your jaw aches, your stomach twists, and you start to wonder if chewing tree bark might be more satisfying. Here's the thing people rarely talk about. The first few weeks on the frontier were often dangerously lean. Your rations from town were limited. You couldn't exactly carry 6 months' worth of food in a wagon without it spoiling, moulding, or becoming mouse property. So settlers like you relied on what they could find, wild plants, scraps of meat, dried beans, cornmeal if they were lucky. But more often than not, you spent your first month hungry. Not just I could eat hungry, but gnaw your knuckles hungry. Some turned to acorns, which are technically edible, if you boil them about 4 times to get the bitter tannins out. Others made soup from whatever was around. Squirrel bones, dandelions, bits of salt pork if they had any. Some even tried boiling their boots, seriously, not often, but enough times that it's recorded in more than one diary. One settler wrote about stewing leather strips and sipping the broth. Better than nothing, he wrote. We assume he was lying. There's also a big debate among historians about just how much help early settlers got from indigenous peoples when it came to identifying local edible plants. Some accounts are full of friendly exchanges and shared meals, others are completely silent on the subject, possibly because the settlers didn't want to admit how much they relied on native knowledge to avoid poisoning themselves with the local flora. Either way, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. You keep walking, watching the sun move higher in the sky, your bag still mostly empty. You start to understand how precious food really is out here. Not just for your stomach, but for your survival. If you don't eat well, you can't work. If you can't work, you can't build. If you can't build, well, you'll just be a skeleton in a log box by winter. By mid-afternoon, your hunger starts playing tricks on you. Every rustle in the brush sounds like something edible. You see movement out of the corner of your eye and freeze. Is it a rabbit? A pheasant? You slowly reach for your knife, inch closer. And it's a stump. Of course, a cruel, deceiving stump. You swear at it anyway, loudly, with emphasis. Eventually luck changes. You spot a flash of movement near the creek, real this time. You drop to your knees and crawl through the brush like a very desperate predator, creeping closer until you see it. A small rabbit, drinking from the edge. Your hands tremble as you slowly draw the knife. You hold your breath. And then the rabbit bolts. Gone. Just like that. You're too slow, too loud, too new at this. This is when you start to realise hunting isn't glamorous. It's not a campfire story. It's hours of crouching, creeping, freezing, waiting, missing. It's getting your hopes up only to end the day chewing stale bread and pretending it's roast beef. And when you do catch something, cleaning it is messy, gruesome, intimate in a way you never wanted your dinner to be. The blood doesn't wash out of your clothes, the smell doesn't leave your hands for days, and yet there's a quirky frontier detail that makes all this slightly more interesting. Some settlers actually preferred trapping to hunting. Less noise, more efficiency. Pitfalls, snares, deadfalls, they built little mechanical nightmares to trick dinner into coming to them. You wonder if you should try one. Maybe you'll have more luck convincing a rabbit to fall into a hole than you did trying to sneak up on it like some exhausted forest ninja. By dusk, you return to your cabin with 6 small blackberries, 3 possibly edible tubers, and what might be a dandelion root. You roast the tubers over the fire. They burn a little. You chew slowly, trying to convince yourself that the bitterness is good, actually. Nutritious, rustic. You lie to yourself a lot these days, but the moment the toe hits hardest is when you find your final piece of bread. You left it in a tin near the fire to keep it dry. You lift the lid, half smiling, only to find that a mouse has chewed the edge and left droppings like a little taunt. You stare at it for a long time, weighing your pride against your hunger. Then you cut off the mouse-chewed part and eat the rest anyway. You're not proud, just alive. And as you curl up for another cold night, belly barely half full, you begin to understand that survival out here isn't about one big, dramatic success. It's 1,000 tiny failures you keep bouncing back from, 1,000 little choices to keep trying when everything around you says, nope. You lick blackberry juice from your fingers, close your eyes, and listen to the wind through the trees. You're still here, still standing, still hungry, but not dead. That's frontier progress. The next morning, the hunger is still there, but it's moved in like an annoying roommate instead of a full-blown crisis. You've learned to ignore it, kind of, but your stomach growls anyway, like it's just reminding you who's in charge. Today, though, you've got a new goal. Hunt. Real meat. Something that walks, or hops, or flies. You've sharpened your knife. Your homemade snare is set by the creek, baited with half a blackberry and your dwindling optimism. You grab your rifle, check your powder, and step into the woods with the fragile confidence of someone who once read a chapter on tracking in a borrowed book. The forest isn't loud, but it is alive. Birds flit between branches above you. Squirrels chatter like tiny woodland jerks. You walk quietly, ears alert, eyes flicking toward every twitch of the underbrush. Hunting, you quickly learn, is mostly walking and waiting. Your boots crunch leaves, no matter how carefully you step. Your breath feels too loud, like even the wind can hear it. You kneel, wait, listen. A snap, too closely, you freeze. A rustle, a blur of movement. You raise the rifle, try to aim, and nothing. Gone. You saw it. You missed it. Your heart pounds like you just outran a mountain lion, but all you're holding is a still-loaded gun and your own frustration. The myth of hunting being this victorious activity? Yeah, not so much. It's mostly cold hands, stiff knees, and wondering whether you're chasing shadows. Sure, Daniel Boone might have bagged 6 deer before breakfast, but you can barely scare up a bird that doesn't fly away laughing. That's the truth for most settlers. Despite what stories claimed, hunting was rarely a sure thing. It helped, yes, but few survived off it alone. Meat was a luxury, not a guarantee. Still, you keep going. Deeper into the woods now, trees grow closer together. The sunlight filters down in patches. It's quiet in that eerie, thick way, the kind of quiet that feels personal. Then, another rustle. This time, something larger. You spot it. A rabbit again, maybe the same one from before, or its smug cousin. You don't breathe. You line up the shot, slowly squeeze the trigger, and bang. The report echoes through the trees, sharp and final. You blink through the smoke. The rabbit is gone. At first, you think you missed again, but then you see it, motionless beneath a bush, a tuft of fur still twitching. You approach slowly, heart pounding. You did it. You actually hit something. There it is, your first real meal in days. It's small, but it's meat. You whisper a quiet thanks, or maybe just a dazed apology, because now comes the messy part. You've never cleaned an animal before, not really, but now you have no choice. You drag the rabbit back to your clearing, lay it on a flat stone and stare at it for a while, wondering how many layers of your soul this is about to peel back. You remember bits and pieces, where to cut, how to peel the skin. Still, your first attempt is rough, bloody, clumsy. The fur doesn't come away cleanly. You nearly lose your lunch at the smell, but you push through, gagging more than once, hands shaking as you fumble with the insides. The entrails steam in the cool air. You bury them, partly out of respect, partly because you don't want to attract anything larger and toothier than you. By the time it's over, you've got a skinned rabbit and a face that looks like you've seen things you'll never forget. You hang the meat by the fire, letting it smoke slowly while you sit back and stare at the sky. It's blue, really blue, like offensively blue. You wonder if rabbits ever stare at the sky and think the same about it before they're shot. The meat cooks unevenly. Some of it's underdone, some scorched, but when you bite in, it's the most delicious thing you've had in weeks. Not because it tastes amazing, it doesn't really, but because you earned it. You chased it, you killed it, you cleaned it, you cooked it, and now it's yours. There's something strangely satisfying in that, even if your stomach still does a little flip at the memory of gutting it. And now for a fun, weird fact. Some settlers believed eating certain animals could give you their traits. Deer made you swift. Rabbit made you fertile or lucky. Bear meat, strength. No scientific backing. Of course, but folklore has a way of sticking. Some even avoided predators entirely, thinking eating them would curse them with rage or madness. You look down at your rabbit and wonder if you've just inherited its poor decision-making. But this brings us to the deeper debate still going on in historical circles. How reliable was hunting, really? Letters from the frontier are full of conflicting accounts. Some say game was plentiful and easy. Others describe entire winters without a single successful hunt. Weather, geography, population pressure, and plain old luck all played a role. If you settled near a river or untouched forest, maybe you had more options. But as more settlers arrived, the animals fled, or died off. What fed one family in 1820 couldn't feed 5 in 1835. And while hunting gets all the dramatic glory, it was trapping and fishing that often carried families through. A snare set overnight or a fish line dropped in the river could mean dinner with less risk and effort. That's the goal tomorrow. Set more traps. Maybe build a fish weir. You're learning that survival here isn't about heroism, it's about strategy, patience, and the occasional lucky shot. Later that night, with your belly fuller than it's been in days, you sit by the fire and look at the bones left on the plate. There are tiny. Barely enough to count as a meal back in your old life. But now, it feels like a feast. You dry and clean the pelt, unsure what you'll do with it, but unwilling to waste anything. Maybe it'll line your boots. Maybe it'll become a pouch. Maybe it'll just be a reminder. You lie back, watching the fire crackle against the dark. The stars return, brighter than ever, distant and silent. The night hums with crickets and the occasional howl, but this time, Bar, you don't flinch. You've fed yourself. You've endured another day. You're learning how to be a predator instead of just prey. Tomorrow, you'll hunt again, and this time the rabbit better run faster. Rain again. But this time it's not a gentle drizzle or a theatrical thunderstorm. It's the cold, relentless kind that falls sideways and gets into places you didn't know could be wet. It started sometime before dawn, pounding the roof of your log cabin like an angry drummer with a grudge. By the time you stumble out of bed, every joint aches and your boots are damp just from sitting near the door. The air feels heavy, like the sky itself has gained weight and decided to slump down on your shoulders. You sigh, deeply. Today's forecast, misery, with a 100% chance of emotional unravelling. You step outside and immediately regret it. Your hair soaks through in seconds. The moss-stuffed cracks in your cabin walls are leaking. The ground is a swamp. And your firewood pile looks like it's given up on life entirely. This isn't just uncomfortable. It's dangerous. Because out here, weather isn't a mood, it's a threat. It doesn't care about your plans or your shelter or your aching back. It just happens, and you have to figure out how to not die in it. You scramble to cover the firewood with a piece of canvas you should have used 3 days ago. Then you start digging a shallow trench around the cabin to keep water from pooling by the walls. It's muddy, cold work. Your clothes are soaked, your fingers numb, and your boots fill with water until every step squelches like a wet sponge. You're pretty sure a frog just swam past your shovel. You keep digging anyway, because if water floods your cabin floor again, you'll lose your last few dry belongings, and possibly your mind. The thing about frontier weather is that it's always extreme. Summers are brutally hot, full of biting flies and sweat-drenched clothes that never fully dry. Winters are so cold they crack your lips, your skin, and sometimes your windows. Spring, floods, autumn, winds so sharp it feels like it's filing your cheekbones. And the weather doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it controls your entire life. Crops fail, roads become impassable, rivers swell and drag away wagons, and if you don't respect it, it'll humble you real quick. You retreat into the cabin, peel off your wet layers, and sit by the fire you've managed to coax back to life. Smoke curls up into the rafters, clinging to the damp logs in your lungs. You cough. Everything smells like wet dog and wood smoke, but at least it's warmish. You wrap a blanket around your shoulders and huddle close, feeling like some grizzled raccoon-human hybrid. The storm outside rages louder now. Thunder cracks, sudden and sharp, like the sky just split open. You flinch instinctively. It's not just the sound. It's what it means. Another day of not hunting, not gathering, not progressing, just surviving. The truth is, weather broke people out here, sometimes literally. Lightning strikes weren't uncommon. Homes burned to the ground during dry summers. One strong gust could snap a chimney clean off. And if you were caught out in the woods, with no shelter and no dry tinder, you could freeze to death with a matchbook in your pocket. It didn't matter how tough or clever you were. Nature wasn't impressed. And here's a bizarre historical tidbit for you. Some early settlers believed in weather omens. They'd watch the way birds flew, how cattle acted, or whether frogs croaked before a storm. A ring around the moon meant snow was coming. Dogs eating grass? Rain. Your old neighbours back in town would have laughed at that stuff, but out here, any edge was better than nothing, even if it came from a toad. Outside, the wind howls, literally. You hear it whistle through the trees like a warning, bending branches and snapping twigs. You close the shutters, if you even had shutters. More likely you just pull a blanket across the gap and pretend it counts. You huddle in your damp cabin, hands wrapped around a tin mug of weak coffee made from grounds you've already used twice. It's bitter and sad, but it's hot, and that's enough to keep you going for now. This is when isolation hits hardest and most. Not the kind you felt that first night, but the deep, bone-chilling loneliness that comes from knowing no one is coming. If your roof caves in, you fix it. If your fire goes out, you relight it. If a tree falls on your outhouse, well, you hold it and cry. There are no neighbours to borrow help from, no sheriff to call, no town meeting to complain at, just you and the weather and the 100 small decisions that could keep you alive, or not. But even in all this damned, shivering misery, there's a strange sort of beauty. A clearing in the trees where the fog settles like a ghost. The crackle of the fire mixing with the low rumble of thunder. The way the rain pounds the roof in a rhythm that's almost hypnotic. You stare into the flames and find yourself drifting, half asleep, half aware, fully exhausted. Some settlers kept journals during storms like this. They'd write by firelight, their ink smudging from moisture, their handwriting shaky. They recorded everything, weather, feelings, what they ate, how much sugar was left. Some entries read like poetry, others are raw survival logs. One woman in the 1830s wrote, "I have not seen the sun in 6 days, the roof drips on my pillow, my shoes are mouldy, I sing hymns to keep from weeping." You relate deeply, and yet you know the storm will pass. Eventually, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. When it does, you'll have work waiting. More firewood to cut, traps to reset, tools to dry, a roof to patch with whatever you can scrounge. And maybe if the ground isn't too soaked, you'll try to find something green to eat that doesn't taste like earth and sadness. You lie down again as the wind screams outside. Blanket pulled to your chin, fire flickering low. Your body aches. Your socks are still wet, but you made it through another day of wild, unfiltered weather on the edge of civilization. And honestly, that might be your greatest achievement yet. The splinter is small, tiny even, barely the width of a matchstick and lodged in the pad of your left thumb. But oh, it burns like it's made of lava and pure spite. You try to pull it out with a knife tip, your hands shaking and dirty, but it slips deeper, vanishing under the skin like a wood-borne parasite. You stare at your thumb, now swollen and throbbing, and wonder, not for the first time, if this is how it starts. Not the pain, the end. Out here, injury isn't just inconvenient, it's a potential death sentence. You sit by the fire with your hand cradled to your chest, teeth gritted, watching the red line of infection creep slowly toward your wrist. The splinter might as well be a dagger. You boil water, clean the knife, and try again. The pain is sharp, clean, almost relieving, because at least it means you're still feeling something. You finally get the thing out, press a rag to the wound, and pour whiskey over it, which makes you scream louder than you expected. You always imagined whiskey would make things better. Frontier movies made it look cool. Rough men pouring it over bullet wounds, then taking a swig like it's nothing. In reality, it stings like betrayal. It smells like rot gut, and it doesn't do much for the pain except give it a soundtrack. You wrap the wound tight and hope for the best. Antibiotics? Not a thing yet. Doctors? They're 30 miles away and half of them trained under someone's uncle. And that's if you could even find one sober enough to see straight. So you do what every other frontier settler had to do. Pray, wait, and try not to bump your thumb on anything because the pain will launch you into another dimension. Injury was part of daily life out here. Axes slipped, knives cut deep, hands crushed under logs, people fell from wagons, broke legs in gopher holes, burned themselves cooking or threw out their backs lifting barrels. There were no ER visits, no urgent care clinics, no painkillers stronger than whiskey or laudanum, and even laudanum, if you had it, came with the tiny side effect of being wildly addictive. So most folks just dealt with pain. Or they didn't. And they died. You remember hearing stories, tales passed around in whispers and letters. A man who scratched his leg on a nail, ignored it, and was gone by the end of the week from blood poisoning. A woman who delivered a baby in a snowstorm lost too much blood and was buried behind the cabin 3 days later. A boy who got bit by a snake and swelled until he couldn't breathe. Nothing heroic. Just quiet, miserable endings. The kind people didn't write songs about. You touch your bandaged hand gently, watching for more swelling. Still tender, but the red line has stopped spreading. You might have gotten lucky, or maybe you just bought yourself a little time. Either way, you're not out of the woods, figuratively and literally. You decide to take it easy for the day, not that the frontier recognizes sick leave. You still have to haul water, stoke the fire, gather what food you can, and chase off whatever creature keeps trying to steal your drying rabbit pelt. Your body protests every movement. Your thumb screams with each shift, but you keep going because that's all there is. No choice, no backup plan, just forward. And now for a lesser-known frontier fact. Settlers often made their own salves using whatever they had on hand: bear grease, pine resin, beeswax, herbs, calendula for inflammation, yarrow to stop bleeding, comfrey for bruises. You remember hearing about a root called golden seal that supposedly drew out the poison. You consider digging around for some later, but right now you wouldn't trust yourself with a shovel, let alone self-medicating with forest plants. Interestingly, there's a scholarly debate around how much of this home medicine was useful and how much was just superstition with fancy packaging. Some remedies actually worked, accidentally often, while others did absolutely nothing or made things worse. There were also folk traditions carried by immigrants and indigenous wisdom borrowed without credit. But separating the helpful from the harmful wasn't always easy. A poultice of mashed garlic might save a wound, or leave it smelling so strong that your neighbours or predators start sniffing around. As evening sets in, the pain in your hand has dulled to a manageable throb. Your body feels heavy. Your muscles are in a state of constant micro-protest. You sit by the fire and try to distract yourself with chores that don't require fine motor skills. Tying bundles of twigs, grinding dried herbs with a rock, watching the kettle boil like it might offer advice. Then a strange thought hits you. How many people have died from dumb things out here? Not dramatic, cinematic deaths, just the quiet kind. A scratch gone bad, a fever left untreated, an infected tooth. That's the one that really gets you. Teeth. You wiggle your molars with your tongue, suddenly aware of how terrifying a cavity would be. You've got no toothbrush, no dentist, no Novocaine. You've got a knife and a bottle of whiskey. That's it. And if something starts to rot in there, well, frontier dentistry is just another word for a horrible afternoon. You laugh, but it comes out hollow. Then you realise you haven't spoken out loud in days. Maybe a grunt here and there, maybe a curse, but no full sentences, no conversations, just thoughts rattling around in your head like angry bees. The isolation is real. It's not just physical anymore, it's inside you. settling in like a parasite, whispering that if something does go wrong, no one will ever know. No one will even find you. Just your little cabin, your silent traps, and a half-eaten bag of flour. You shake off the thought, literally. You stand, stretch, and pace around the fire like a man trying to keep his ghost from settling in. Outside, the stars begin to peek through the treetops again. It's clear tonight. Cold but still. The kind of night that makes you remember what it felt like to live before everything became so hard and painful and dangerous. You step outside, wrap your cloak tight, and look up at the sky. The stars are ridiculous, almost mocking in their brightness, and somehow they make you feel a little less small. Maybe not safer, but not forgotten either. Your thumb still hurts, but the bleeding's stopped. The fever hasn't come, and you're still breathing. Out here, that's practically a miracle. You wake up to the sound of metal clanking, your kettle shifting slightly on the fire pit stones as the morning wind pushes against it. The smell of damp ash and yesterday's boiled root still lingers in the air. You stretch, crack your neck, and sit up slowly, careful of your thumb, which surprisingly no longer feels like it's going to explode. The bandage is still in place, stiff with dried herbs and smoke. But the swelling has gone down and no fever crept in during the night. Your luck might be changing, or maybe your immune system has just decided it wants to fight this one out with some dignity. Today, though, you're not alone, or at least not entirely. She's out by the stream already, her skirt wet to the knees, hands in the water, probably scrubbing yesterday's cookpot with a stone and a sigh that sounds exactly like yours did last week. Her name is Sarah, and she arrived with her husband and 2 kids just 2 days ago, building a rough camp on the next parcel over. You first met when she stomped through the woods holding a rifle that looked like it weighed as much as she did, asking if you'd seen any of their chickens, which had apparently wandered off like idiots. You said no, but shared a smile, and then, because this is the frontier and kindness might save your life one day, you gave her the last of your salt. Now you watch her for a moment from a distance. She's efficient in that way women out here tend to be, practical, quiet, and far tougher than the floral bonnet suggests. The fire crackles behind you as you toss another log onto it and try to shake off the cold. You think back to something you read once, before all this, that pioneer women were the backbone of every settlement. At the time, it sounded like inspirational poster fluff. But now you get it. Because there is no surviving out here without women like her, who can butcher a hog, birth a baby, sew a shirt, shoot a raccoon, and boil dinner all before sundown. And if she's like most frontier women, her life is already harder than either than yours, and she's still expected to smile through it. She returns a few hours later, this time with her 2 kids in tow, a boy maybe 7, and a girl who looks like she's still figuring out how her legs work. They're wrapped in layers, faces dirty but eyes sharp. Sarah carries a bundle of sticks in one arm and a rabbit in the other. You raise an eyebrow. She raises one right back and says, "He wandered into the snare I told my husband wouldn't work. Guess I'll be making stew." You offer to trade her the last of your dried apples for half, and she agrees without hesitation. Out here, food isn't just food, it's social currency. As you sit beside your separate fires, talking across a few yards of brush and mud, you learn that she used to be a school teacher, that she once danced in a town hall with actual wooden floors, that she hasn't slept through the night in 4 months, that childbirth nearly killed her twice. Her husband, Peter, is off in the woods somewhere trying to find deer, or maybe himself. He's not exactly the chatty type, but he means well. He's just quieter now, she says, since we lost our first farm to the frost. Her eyes linger on the fire for a second too long. And here's a historical truth that doesn't get enough airtime. Frontier women didn't just help with survival. They led it, often silently, often in the background. But without them, most families wouldn't have lasted a single season. They grew the gardens, made the clothes, preserved the food, and held things together when the men fell apart. Diaries from the time are full of lines like, "Mother buried the baby and then made soup for the rest of us." 1 sentence, 3 tragedies. No drama, no flourish, just survival. There's also this quirky little fact you recall: many women, once widowed or left behind, simply kept going, alone, on the frontier, running homesteads, raising kids, managing livestock, defending property. And often these solo women were among the most respected settlers, because they didn't complain, didn't quit, and absolutely did not wait around for rescue. You help Sarah carry a few logs back to her cabin in progress, which is even more pitiful than yours was at that stage. One wall leans so hard you think it might be trying to escape. She sees your look and sucks. It's temporary, like everything out here. You chuckle, then help her wedge a support beam into place while the boy starts stacking firewood with the concentration of a small cold robot. The girl sits in the mud eating something she probably shouldn't. Later, over bowls of watery stew that somehow taste like warmth and effort, you talk about the little things, how to keep boots from moulding, how to scare off foxes without wasting a bullet. What herbs can be chewed for a toothache? The sun drops lower. You don't say it out loud, but the presence of another adult, someone who understands the shape of your exhaustion, is a relief you hadn't realised you needed. After she leaves, you sit outside watching the smoke curl into the twilight. You think about the women who crossed these lands in skirts and corsets, pushing wagons, giving birth beside rivers, bearing husbands on hillsides and then pressing on. You wonder how many names were lost, how many stories ended quietly in snowstorms or childbirths or silence. You wonder how many of them screamed into the night sky and got no answer, and you wonder what kind of courage it takes to keep moving forward when you're expected to do it with grace. Your fire crackles, the stars creep out again. You wrap yourself in your coat and lean against the cabin wall, listening to the low murmur of frogs from the creek. Tomorrow the work begins again, more hunting, more building, more surviving. But tonight, you're not the only soul out here. You're part of something, tentative, fragile, but real. And that out here is worth more than gold. It's the stillness that gets you, not the silence, because out here nothing is ever truly silent, but that creeping, unnatural stillness that sinks into your bones and makes the hairs on your neck rise. The wind has stopped. The trees aren't swaying. Even the birds, usually chattering from the canopy like gossipy neighbours, have gone quiet. The air is thick, like it's holding its breath. You step outside your cabin, scan the tree line, and feel the old, familiar tickle of unease crawl up your spine. Something's off. This is your third week out here alone. If you don't count Sarah's occasional visits or the deer that keeps taunting your traps by just not stepping in them. You've learned to recognise most sounds, the rustle of raccoons in the brush, the distant splash of a trout jumping, the creak of your own cabin when it settles at night. But today, the woods feel like they're watching you, like they're waiting, and you can't help but remember the stories. You always thought the isolation would be peaceful, serene even, a return to something simple and raw, but you didn't expect the psychological weight of being the only heartbeat for miles. No conversations, no footsteps, no background noise, unless you count your own pulse drumming in your ears. You talk to yourself more now, half for comfort, half to remember what your voice sounds like. You laugh at your own jokes. You hum songs you forgot you knew. You make up names for the squirrels. Still, the mind wanders. And when it wanders out here, where the line between reality and imagination blurs in the foggy mornings, things get weird. You remember last night, when you woke up suddenly to a snap outside the window. You held your breath, hand gripping your knife in the dark, listening, nothing. Then another snap, closer, and the distinct sound of something breathing low and slow rammed outside the wall. You waited, didn't move, didn't blink, until the sound faded and the night swallowed it again. Could have been an animal, could have been something else. Because here's the thing, people don't talk enough about the way solitude plays with your senses. You see shapes where there are none, hear voices in running water. You stare into the dark woods and your brain starts drawing outlines, figures, faces, movement. Sometimes you convince yourself there is someone out there, watching, waiting, and sometimes that thought feels almost comforting, like at least you're not alone, even if it's something you'd rather not be alone with. Back in town they'd call it cabin fever or frontier madness. But out here, those aren't cute phrases, they're warnings. You heard stories. People who went too long without another human voice and cracked open like ice on a frozen lake. One man tried to talk to a stump for 6 days. Another thought his reflection in the river was his brother and drowned trying to reach him. And then there are the journals. Settlers scribbling prayers and nonsense in the margins, sentences trailing off like they forgot how to finish thoughts. And still, the most unsettling thing about isolation isn't madness. It's awareness. That deep, slow realization that you are utterly alone. If you trip, no one's coming. If you scream, no one's hearing it. If something takes you in the night, the forest will swallow the noise and carry on like you were never here. But it's not all bleak. There are moments when the quiet is sacred, when the stillness becomes a kind of company, when you look out over your tiny clearing, see the smoke rise from your chimney and think, I did this. You built something. It's small and crooked, and occasionally leaks, but it's yours. And in the absence of distractions, you start noticing things you never would have seen before. The way moss grows in spirals on certain trees, the way your breath hangs in the air just before sunrise, the way the stars shift night to night like they're trying to write something in the sky. There's also a strange comfort in ritual. You wake up, stoke the fire, haul water, check the traps, eat something vaguely food adjacent, sharpen tools, patch clothes. The tasks don't care how you feel, they just need doing. And sometimes that's exactly what you need. Structure in the midst of emotional freefall. Sarah stops by briefly around noon, her daughter in tow. She's run out of salt and asks if you've seen any bees this season. She wants to try finding a wild hive. You haven't, but you say you'll keep an eye out. Her presence, even brief, feels like stepping out of a tunnel. You make awkward small talk, laugh about the raccoon that tried to steal her sock. Yes, just one. And then she's off again. You wave. The stillness closes back in behind her. You sit on the log outside your cabin and eat a dry crust of bread, chewing slowly, listening for anything out of place. The wind picks up briefly, enough to make the trees groan and whisper to each other. And that's when you hear it again. A voice. You freeze. It's faint. Too faint to understand, but it's definitely a voice. You drop the bread, stand slowly, eyes scanning the woods. Nothing. You walk a few steps toward the edge of the trees, every muscle tight, listening. Silence. But it felt real, not imagined. Not like the usual echoes your brain invents. You stand there for a long time and staring into the shadows, daring them to move. They don't. Eventually you back away, slowly, back into your cabin, close the door, and sit by the fire. Heart still racing. And here's where the debate comes in. Historians argue over just how common frontier hallucinations really were. Some say they were rare, the result of true isolation or starvation. Others believe they happened often but went unrecorded because people were too ashamed to admit them. But the line between spiritual experience, madness, and frontier stress was a blurry one. And out here, where the veil between wilderness and human sanity is paper thin, who's to say what's real? You throw another log on the fire, sit cross-legged, and try to focus on the normal. The heat, the flickering light, the soft hiss of sap in the wood. You hum to yourself, something tuneless, just to fill the space. Outside, the stillness lingers, thick, watchful, but you're not afraid. Not really, because if something is out there, at least it means you're not alone. You wake up to the smell of smoke, not your fire, but something else. Faint, far off, but sharp enough to snap you awake before the sun has even crested the treetops. You grab your rifle, throw on your coat, and step outside. The morning is grey and chill, dew clinging to every blade of grass like the world's just taken a nervous sweat. The smoke isn't thick. Not yet, but it's definitely real. You scan the horizon, half expecting to see flames licking through the trees. Nothing. Just that thin, strange haze drifting from somewhere upriver. Your stomach clenches. You've heard stories. Cabin fires, brush fires, even full-scale raids. Not every settler came out here with the same dream of peace and potatoes. Some came to take. Some came to settle arguments the old-fashioned way, with powder and fire, and some just got desperate enough to do things they never imagined when they left the safety of cities and towns. You look down the trail towards Sarah's cabin, then the opposite direction, deeper into the wilderness. There's nothing to see, just trees, but suddenly they feel a lot less friendly. You sit by the fire, stirring a pot of water that refuses to boil, trying to talk yourself down. It could just be a settler burning off brush, or someone clearing a new field, or a trash fire that got a little too enthusiastic. It's probably nothing, but in the frontier, probably nothing is a phrase people say right before things go very wrong. The uneasy fog of uncertainty hangs with you all morning. You chop wood without focus, reset your snares with one eye on the trees. When a bird explodes out of a bush near your foot, you almost fire your rifle out of sheer panic. Your heart feels like it's beating in your throat, and you realize you haven't had to think about other people in days. Hunger, weather, injury, you were getting used to those enemies, but now you have to wonder who else is out there, and what they want. Around noon you hear hooves. It's the most foreign sound you've heard in weeks. 4-beat rhythm, slow and heavy. You duck behind the corner of your cabin, rifle raised, heart pounding. The horse comes into view, the rider's tall, hunched in a wide-brimmed hat and leading a second horse loaded down with supplies. You don't recognize him. He doesn't look like someone from the town, Or from Sarah's camp? He doesn't look like trouble exactly, but he's also not smiling. Then again, no one smiles out here unless something's gone weird. He stops just short of your clearing, raises a hand and calls out in a calm, gravelly voice, "Friendly." Just one word, then he waits. You step out slowly, rifle lowered but not dropped. "Smoke?" You ask. He nods. "Saw it too. Came to check. Thought maybe someone lost their chimney." There's a long pause between you, the kind that could go friendly or hostile with just a breath out of place. Finally, you nod and gesture to the stump by your fire. He climbs down, stretches his legs, and starts unpacking a small pouch of dried meat. You offer him a drink from your kettle, and the tension thaws by a hair. His name's Elias. Says he's been trapping up north all winter, just passing through on his way to the next ridge, where he swears the streams still have beaver. You don't ask for proof. He doesn't offer any. That's the code out here. You don't push unless there's reason to. Everyone's got ghosts, and most of them walk just behind the saddle. He tells you the smoke might be from an abandoned shack he passed a few days back. Said it looked looted, maybe burned intentionally. "No bodies," he says, chewing slowly. "No signs, just gone." You nod, even though your stomach tightens. You don't ask if it could have been a raid. You don't ask who did it. The frontier has rules, but none of them are written. And justice is often a matter of location, mood, and who's still breathing when the dust settles. Which brings us to the elephant in the cabin: native relations. It's one of those parts of frontier life that history has tried to compress into neat little paragraphs, peaceful trade or violent conflict, with not much in between. But the truth? It was complicated, tense, sometimes respectful, sometimes tragic, always uncertain. Some settlers traded regularly with nearby tribes, sharing furs, food and information. Others lived in constant fear of attacks, whether real or imagined. And often the line between peace and violence was razor thin, shifted by broken treaties, encroached hunting grounds, or one hot-headed settler with a gun and a grudge. You've never seen a native person since arriving here, but you've felt them in the land, in the paths that seem too worn for just animals, in the fire pits you didn't build, in the trees that feel like they've been watching longer than you've been alive. You wonder what they think of you, this clueless interloper carving a cabin into ground that's held centuries of footsteps before yours. Elias seems to read your mind. "Land remembers," he mutters, eyes on the fire. "We think we own it, build on it, farm it, but it don't forget." He pokes the coals with a stick and doesn't say more. The tension rises with the wind. You sit together for a while, chewing quietly, swapping a few stories, his mostly about wolves and frostbite, yours mostly about beans and frustration. He's got a quiet humour about him, dry, a little sharp around the edges. When he leaves, he tips his hat, thanks you for the tea, and disappears down the trail without asking de relations, like he already knew the way. And just like that, you're alone again. But now the forest feels different. Not empty, but occupied. Like it's held its breath and exhaled something ancient, something watching. You patch the cabin wall before sundown, not because it needs it, but because your hands need something to do. You check your rifle 3 times, you sharpen your knife and place it by your bedroll. You don't light the fire too high. You sit in the shadows and listen. And the thing is, you're not scared. Not exactly, you're just aware that every creak in the floorboard, every gust of wind, every distant cry in the woods means something. You just don't know what, but you're learning. The fire crackles softly this morning, flickering in that oddly comforting way that only a barely contained flame can manage. You're sitting on your log stool, gnawing on a piece of dry bread that tastes like ash and effort, when it finally clicks. This whole lone pioneer thing is a complete fantasy, an actual myth. You don't say it out loud, it's too early for honesty, but you know it's true. Everything from the books, the paintings, the heroic stories back home, all of it conveniently leaves out how utterly impossible it is to survive out here by yourself. Sure, you're technically alive, you're still breathing, eating, barely, and keeping the cabin from collapsing with spit and desperation. But surviving alone, it's a slow, grinding madness. Everything takes 4 times as long. Every task from hauling water to patching the roof becomes an epic, muddy saga. You forget things, you fall behind, and when you're out here by yourself, there's no one to remind you that forgetting to check the snares means no dinner, or that if your boots stay wet for one more day, your toes might stage a revolt. That's the part no one talks about. Even the so-called lone pioneers had help. They had family, neighbours, even rival homesteaders a few miles off who could be counted on in a pinch. The popular image of the rugged, solitary frontiersman might sell penny novels and inspire school plays, but out here, it's just a fast track to frostbite and starvation. You think back to Elias, the trapper who visited 2 days ago. As mysterious and solitary as he seemed, even he was part of something, passing through, trading, swapping stories. Even he didn't ride through these woods without occasionally stopping for tea or shared firelight. And Sarah, she's got her hands full with 2 kids and a half-standing shack, but she makes time to come check on you, drops off news, brings salted pork when she can spare it, because even she knows you can't do this alone. The truth is, your tiny outpost is beginning to feel like part of a fragile, unofficial community. A loose network of settlers and passers-by connected by proximity, desperation, and the occasional chicken theft. There's the elderly couple to the east. You haven't met them yet, but you've seen smoke from their chimney, steady and rhythmic like clockwork. There's someone else, farther north, who sings loudly while chopping wood. Their voice carries clear through the trees, off-key but committed. These are your neighbours now. You don't know their names, but their presence matters. If something goes wrong, if your roof caves in, or if a bear decides to relocate into your pantry, someone might hear your shouting, might come running, might not, but the might is better than nothing. You get up and stretch, joints cracking like cold branches, and start your morning tasks. Fetch water, check traps, turn the compost pile. Try not to resent the squirrel that's been stealing from your drying rack like it pays rent. As you walk the path down to the creek, you pass the spot where your first snare is tied to a low branch. It's triggered, but empty. The bait is gone. Again. You sigh. This is the 4th time this week. Somewhere out there is a very smug rabbit who now has a PhD in rope mechanics. You reset the trap with hands that are too cold and fingers that still ache from the splinter incident. As you work, a thought creeps in, quiet and unwelcome. What happens if you get sick again? Really sick? What if your leg breaks? What if something happens to Sarah? To her kids? The what-ifs pile up like firewood, each one heavier than the last. It's not just the physical danger that demands a community, it's the mental weight. The emotional trench you dig yourself into, deeper every time you spend a full day without speaking aloud. There are days when you go hours without a clear thought. Just action, repetition, function. You're no longer living. You're maintaining, like a tool, a cog, a fire that hasn't gone out yet but isn't giving off much heat either. And that's when you make a decision. You're going to reach out. That afternoon, you gather what few tradable items you can. A small sack of dried herbs, a sharp flint, an extra coil of rope, and 2 smoked fish that miraculously escaped the raccoon war of last week. You pack them into a cloth bundle and head toward the trail that leads to Sarah's homestead. The trees loom high above you, so thick with the sound of distant birds and the occasional flutter of something you hope isn't a snake. Your boots sink into the mud, and the air smells of old pine and last night's rain. When you arrive, Sarah is out front, using a wooden spoon to scoop something out of a pot that smells far too good to be legal. Her son waves. Her daughter is half asleep in a basket. You hand her the bundle without a word, and she gives you a long look, quiet and understanding. She doesn't ask why you came. She just nods and starts boiling water for tea. You sit on a log while her son kicks rocks at a nearby stump and explains in great detail how he's training to be a squirrel hunter. "They're fast, but I'm faster," he says with the confidence only a 7-year-old can carry. You nod seriously and promise to report any rogue squirrel activity his way. Sarah hands you a cup of tea, thin, earthy, hot, and sits beside you. She tells you her husband hasn't returned yet. She says it without emotion, which says more than any sobbing ever could. You don't ask questions, instead you offer to help repair the lean-to roof that's sagging at the back of their cabin. It's a small thing, a simple thing, but by sunset the patch is holding. The roof no longer leaks. And Sarah? She smiles. Just a little. When you return home, the path feels a bit less narrow. The cabin feels less like a cage and more like a part of something, rough and distant, sure, but real. And as you sit by your fire that night, wrapping your hands around another mug of thin, bitter tea, you finally say it out loud just to make it real. No one does this alone. Not for long. You realise it when you pull off your boot. The smell hits first, something between wet leather, mildew, and despair. Then the sock comes off and you stare at the situation with genuine disbelief. Your foot looks like it's been soaking in a swamp for 3 days, and to be fair, it has. You poke at one toe. The skin is pale and squishy, like boiled dough. You've seen mould on bread that looked more confident. You mutter something not family-friendly under your breath and toss the sock toward the door, where it lands with a damp plop and probably develops a sole. You're disgusting, you know that. And out here, that's kind of the default. No matter how many frontier paintings show pioneers standing heroically on mountaintops with flowing hair and freshly washed clothes. The truth is, the frontier stinks. Literally, constantly, all of you smells. Your clothes smell, your cabin smells. The air inside your cabin smells like someone tried to cook a raccoon and then gave up halfway. And the worst part? You've just gotten used to it. You think back to the last time you bathed properly. Not a quick splash in the creek or rubbing yourself down with a damp cloth and a prayer, but a real honest-to-goodness bath you can't remember. And you know what? That's terrifying. Hygiene on the frontier wasn't just inconvenient, it was a gamble. Water had to be hauled, heated and rationed. Soap was precious, often homemade, and smelled like lye, because that's what it was. If you had good soap, it still stung your skin. Bad soap, it might just peel off a layer or two. And the idea of washing daily? Laughable. You were lucky to wash weekly. Maybe, if the weather was kind and you hadn't spent the last 3 days fighting raccoons off your food supply. You decide, for the sake of your soul and your sanity, to attempt some semblance of cleaning. You fill your dented tin pot with creek water, set it over the fire and wait. You strip down, each layer sticking to your skin like it's in a codependent relationship. Your shirt smells like fire, meat, sweat and regret. Your pants are so stiff they might stand up without you. You don't even want to talk about the socks. When the water's finally warm, you splash it onto yourself with a cloth. It's not enough to get truly clean, but enough to knock the edge off. You scrub your arms until your skin feels like it might peel. You rinse your face and are shocked at the colour of the water afterward. Muddy, with a floating twig for dramatic effect. You douse your feet last, muttering apologies to whatever gods care about personal hygiene. Then, wrapped in a threadbare blanket, you sit beside the fire and dry off. Shivering. Cleanish, you start to feel human again. Not civilized exactly, but less feral. Your skin tingles. Your hair, still damp, clings to your forehead. You stare at the fire and wonder how long it'll last. This fragile illusion of cleanliness, before the mud, sweat and soot rejoin the party. And here's a historical nugget for you. People on the frontier knew they stank. They joked about it, complained about it in letters, and occasionally even hosted community bath days. Not because they suddenly found morals, but because filth was directly tied to illness. Lice, fleas, ringworm, infected wounds, these weren't rare inconveniences, they were constant. And when winter hit, you could go months with no wash, wrapped in layers that rarely came off because taking them off meant freezing. Fringe detail, settlers sometimes smoked their clothes over fires to kill bugs. Picture it, you standing in a cloud of smoke like a desperate ham, hoping the heat would chase the lice out of your seams. And it sort of worked, sometimes. Until the smoke smell mixed with the sweat smell and the jerky smell and turned your wardrobe into something you could weaponize. You throw your socks into a pot with water and a sliver of soap and let them boil. The water foams and darkens. You stir them like a cursed stew. This is not how you imagined adulthood. The socks eventually get rinsed and hung near the fire, dripping like the world's saddest decorations. You consider doing the same with your shirt, but realise you'd have nothing else to wear while it dries. So you turn it inside out and pretend that's progress. Then there's your hair. You haven't had a haircut in months. You look like a lost poet who gave up halfway through a forest-themed poem and decided to become the forest instead. You hack at it with your knife in front of a cracked piece of polished tin, managing to remove the worst of the tangles and a few clumps of dirt. You tell yourself it's rustic, not tragic. But the real tragedy? There's no deodorant, no toothpaste, no clean towels, and absolutely no privacy. Your entire bathroom routine is happening 3 feet from your dinner fire. A mouse runs by at one point and you almost apologise to it for the smell. You find a pine branch to chew on to simulate brushing your teeth. It tastes like tree because it is a tree. Later, Sarah stops by, her daughter clinging to her leg and holding what appears to be a dead squirrel by the tail. Sarah looks you up and down and raises an eyebrow. You bathe? You nod, a little proud. Can't tell, she says with a smirk. But good for you. You both laugh, because frontier humour is 90% dark sarcasm and 10% shared trauma. She leaves you a jar of what she calls grease soap, which smells like bacon and pine needles, and reminds you not to use it near a fire. You're not sure if she's joking. Probably not. As night falls, you crawl into your bedroll, skin still slightly itchy but no longer caked with 3 layers of crust. Your feet are dry, your face is less grimy, and for a brief, beautiful moment you feel like a semi-functioning human being. Then your stomach growls, your roof leaks a little onto your blanket, and something small but definitely alive scurries across the floorboards. So yeah, not perfect, but cleaner, which, by frontier standards, is basically royalty. You've barely stepped out the door when the wagon wheel gives out. 1 second, it's rolling along just fine, wobbling a little, sure, but you've learned to accept wobbling as part of life. The next second, crack. A wooden spoke splits, the rim folds in like a drunk accordion, and the whole thing keels sideways, dumping the back half of your gear into the mud like a toddler flipping a dinner plate. You stand there for a moment, staring at it, mouth half open, brain buffering, and then let out a slow, drawn-out sigh. One of those sighs that starts in your soul and ends with birds flying off nearby branches. Travel on the frontier is like signing a contract with chaos. The idea of it sounds fine, noble even. Oh, I'll just ride out to the next settlement. Sure, great plan, but once you actually do it, reality hits like a pack mule with an attitude. Roads? If they exist at all, they're muddy death traps or barely discernible wagon ruts gouged into unforgiving terrain. Bridges? Ha! Maybe if you count 2 logs and a silent prayer. Rivers, mountains, storms, wild animals, and the ever-present possibility that your ride might literally fall apart beneath you. Travelling is a high-stakes game of survival with wheels attached. The busted wagon means today's grand journey to the trading post is officially postponed. You'd needed to restock. Salt, bullet tips, maybe even sugar if you dared to dream. You also owed Sarah some fabric in exchange for that grease soap she gave you. And let's be honest, you were kind of hoping to score a fresh loaf of bread from the widow who bakes them twice a week and sells them for what might as well be a king's ransom. But now, you're not going anywhere. You crouch beside the wrecked wheel, poking at it with the kind of expertise that comes from not knowing what the heck you're doing but pretending otherwise. It's splintered clean through and you don't have a spare. Because of course you don't. Who carries an extra wheel? That's something people should do, but don't. You curse quietly and start dragging your supplies back toward the cabin, one awkward bundle at a time. You're still fuming when it starts to drizzle. Of course it does. Back in the civilized world, travel means schedules and inns and maps. Out here, it's hope, mud and guesswork. You've met people who got lost for days just trying to follow a creek upstream. One woman wandered in circles for 3 days after her horse bolted, only to end up a mile from her own cabin. Another man swore he saw lights in the woods and followed them, thinking they were lanterns. Turned out it was swamp gas. He walked into a bog and had to be pulled out by his angry cousin. You've heard worse too, wagon trains swallowed by rivers, oxen collapsing mid-pass. Families stranded by early snow and forced to wait it out in half-buried wagons with dwindling food and frozen water barrels. And yet, people kept doing it. Because what choice did they have? If you needed medicine, supplies, news, or just a break from your own haunted thoughts, you had to go. Walk, ride, push, crawl, whatever it took. The worst part? The constant gamble. Every mile is a question. Will the weather hold? Will the trail still be passable? Will the bridge be there? Will the ferryman be drunk or dead or just decided he's not working Tuesdays anymore? And then there are the rivers. You think back to your first crossing, no bridge, just a rough guide who swore it wasn't that deep. Spoiler alert, it was that deep. The water went up to your ribs, the mule panicked halfway across, and your boots haven't been the same since. You nearly lost a crate of flour and most of your dignity. You remember clinging to the wagon side, muttering something that may have technically been a prayer or possibly just threats. Even when everything goes right, travel leaves its mark. Bruised shins, sore tailbones, bugs in places you didn't know could have bugs. You arrive at your destination looking like you've been rolling downhill in a burlap sack, and then, after all that, you get to do it again on the way back. Later that afternoon, Sarah stops by with her son, who offers you half a loaf of bread, like he's presenting the crown jewels. You take it with the reverence it deserves. In exchange, you tell them what happened with your wagon. Sarah nods sympathetically. "Happened to us last month," she says. "We had to walk 10 miles with a busted axle and 2 screaming kids. I nearly left Peter in a ditch." You all laugh, a little too hard, because there's not much else to do. She offers to help repair the wheel tomorrow. Her husband's supposedly good with spokes and has a stash of salvaged wood. You accept, relieved, and realise again how deeply survival depends on the people around you. The trade of skills, the quiet alliances, the willingness to lift one another up when something breaks, because something always breaks. You spend the rest of the day fashioning a temporary handcart out of scrap wood and sheer desperation. It creaks worse than your knees, but it'll carry small loads. It might even hold a rabbit trap if you balance it right. You name it stupid cart because it refuses to go in a straight line and nearly runs over your own foot. Twice. As night falls, you eat the bread slowly, savouring every bite. It's dense, a little burned on one side and possibly 3 days old, but it tastes like comfort and effort. You sit on the cabin step, watching the stars emerge between dark clouds, your broken wagon hulking in the shadows like a reminder of how fragile your plans really are. You think about the miles that separate you from the next settlement, about the people who never made it back, about the ones still out there, lost or waiting for help that won't come. And you feel a strange mixture of fear and gratitude, that you're stuck. Yes, possède ça, but not alone. Tomorrow, you'll fix the wheel. Or at least try. Out here, progress comes in splinters and stubbornness. You've been staring at the same chunk of boiled root for nearly 10 minutes, and it's staring back like it knows exactly how bad it tastes. You prod it with your fork, well, stick, and sigh. Again. You're hungry, you're tired, and every bite feels like chewing damp cardboard dipped in earth. Not even good earth, like mouldy dirt scraped from under a rotting log. And yet this is dinner. Again. Because out here, the frontier diet isn't about flavour, it's about not dying. You pop the root in your mouth, chew reluctantly, and try not to gag. It's fibrous. That's a nice way to say it's the culinary equivalent of regret. You wash it down with lukewarm creek water and mentally catalogue your food stores. A few dried beans, half a jar of rancid-looking grease, something that might have been jerky 3 weeks ago, and one mysterious powder you're pretty sure is either flour or finely ground plaster. You consider tasting it, you don't. People back east have no idea what you're eating out here. In the letters you wrote home, before you ran out of paper, you described your meals with gentle exaggeration. Simple fare, you wrote, rustic and hearty. Lies. All of it. You'd kill for a rustic anything right now. A slice of pie, a fried egg, heck, even a stale biscuit. But the frontier diet doesn't care about cravings, it's about what's available, and most of the time that's a short and depressing list. You remember when you first arrived, dreaming about fresh-caught trout and roasted rabbit, and sure, you've had both exactly once each. The rest of the time, you've been on a steady rotation of boiled tubers, stewed weeds, and squirrel meat so stringy it qualifies as dental floss. If you're lucky, you find wild berries. If you're unlucky, you find out too late that the berries weren't actually edible. Let's just say that day ended with you curled in a ball behind the cabin, making noises that would scare off wolves. Frontier cooking is all about creativity under duress. No milk, no butter, no sugar. You can make bread out of cornmeal and water. You can stretch broth with bark. You've tried roasting acorns, soaking them, smashing them into paste. They still taste like punishment. Sometimes you roast grasshoppers. You never planned to become someone who eats bugs. But here we are. A surprising number of them taste vaguely nutty, which is horrifying information to know firsthand. You flip through your memory for anything remotely like a recipe. The recipes you've learned are more like loose curses passed down from other desperate souls. One trapper swore by boiling pine needles into a tea to keep the scurvy away. It tastes like wet Christmas and does absolutely nothing for your mood. Sarah told you to simmer wild greens with vinegar if you can get away with it, which you can't. She also once mentioned coffee made from roasted chicory root, which is about as close to actual coffee as a boot is to a steak. Still, you keep trying. You gather mushrooms, very carefully. You roast small birds when you catch them, though there's barely enough meat to fill a spoon. Sometimes, when your traps are empty and your garden is just a few sad weeds pretending to be vegetables, you go to bed hungry. Not skip up to meal hungry, not oh no, I forgot lunch hungry, hollow hungry, the kind that sits in your belly like a stone and whispers, maybe bark isn't so bad. Here's a quirky frontier fact. Some settlers made jelly from cactus and syrup from corn cobs. Corn cobs. Imagine being so desperate for sweetness that you boiled discarded corn skeletons in water and convinced yourself the resulting sludge was a treat. That's not cooking, that's a cry for help. And yet, people did it, repeatedly, and wrote about it like it was a triumph. Even stranger, Some folks actually got creative with lemon ash. No, seriously, corn ash was used in a primitive form of nixtamalization to make cornmeal more nutritious. But if you get it wrong, congratulations, you've invented a gritty soup that tastes like your chimney. There's an open debate among scholars about just how nutritionally deficient frontier diets really were. Some argue that early settlers adapted well, learned to use the land, incorporated indigenous food knowledge, and lived off the land with surprising success. Others point to the frequency of scurvy, rickets, and straight-up starvation and say, yeah, no. You're not a historian, but judging by the way your ribs are starting to show and your fingernails are getting weird, you'd lean toward the everyone was malnourished and lying about it camp. This morning you found a half-rotten turnip that had somehow survived in your dirt cellar. You cut away the mush, boiled it until it stopped smelling like feet and called it breakfast. Lunch was a handful of toasted seeds you scavenged from a plant that probably wasn't poisonous. For dinner, you're back to the boiled root again. You consider slicing it thinner, maybe roasting it next time, pretending it's fries. You laugh out loud at the thought. You miss fries so much it hurts. Then there are the cravings. You'd trade your last bullet for a slice of apple pie. You'd walk 15 miles barefoot for a cup of real coffee. You'd sell your soul for a hunk of bread with actual butter. The problem is, your soul's already mortgaged to the raccoons, and your coffee is currently a handful of burnt acorns you plan to grind into sadness tomorrow. As you finish your meal, if you can call it that, you look over at your journal, where you've been keeping notes on what doesn't make you sick. It's a short list. Underlined entries include dandelion roots, bitter but safe, fiddleheads, must cook thoroughly, and the yellow mushrooms with cracked tops, never again. That one has a sketch next to it, with a frowning face and some flames for dramatic flair. You wrap up what's left of the root, if anything, and pack it away. Tomorrow maybe you'll catch a rabbit, or find a new patch of edible weeds. Or maybe you'll cave and try to make that pine bark stew you heard about from Elias. He called it medicinal. You think that means it tastes like betrayal but keeps you alive. The fire's burning low now. You sit back, stomach half full, breath warm into the cold air. Your body's tired, but it's moving. You're still here. And out here, that counts as a feast. The boy is hauling firewood like it weighs nothing. He's maybe 5, 6 years old, tops, with arms like toothpicks, and a face smudged with dirt and something that was probably jammed 2 weeks ago. You watch him from the edge of Sarah's yard, jaw clenched, wondering if his tiny spine is going to snap under the weight of that bundle. But no, he adjusts it, grunts, and marches right past you like a pint-sized soldier. Behind him, his older sister, older by maybe 2 years, is chopping kindling with a stone that she's wielding like it's Excalibur. She nearly takes off her own foot twice, but you have to admire the confidence. Welcome to childhood on the frontier. Out here, kids don't get childhoods, not the way you remember yours anyway. There's no school bell ringing, no chalkboards, no hopscotch drawn on sidewalks. There are no sidewalks. There are no toys unless you count a stick shaped vaguely like a horse. No cartoons, no recess. Just work from the moment you can stand up without falling over. If you're old enough to walk, you're old enough to carry water, or scare birds from the crops, or pick bugs off of bean plants until your fingers smell like failure. Sarah waves to you from the doorway, her apron stained and her expression tired. She doesn't say much today, just a look that says, you get it. She's been up since before dawn, baking something hard and vaguely bread-shaped while keeping one eye on the baby and the other on a raccoon that's taken up residence under her floorboards. You ask where Peter is. She shrugs. Out hunting. Which, you're beginning to realise, is code for, I hope he comes back with something other than excuses. You offer to help with the firewood, but her son gives you a look like, don't you dare take my job. So instead, you sit with Sarah by the fire, watching her kids buzz around like miniature adults. And you ask the question that's been eating at the edge of your brain since you met her. What's it like, raising them out here? She doesn't answer at first. Just stares into the flames. Then finally, with a sigh that sounds like it comes from somewhere far deeper than her lungs, she says, it's like trying to teach a bird to swim while you're drowning. You nod. That sounds about right. The strange thing about frontier kids is how quickly they become little versions of their parents, but harder. Rougher, funnier too, in a dark, no one gets out of this alive kind of way. You've heard Sarah's daughter describe a thunderstorm as God stomping around because he dropped his soup. Her son once asked you if horses cry when they get lonely, then immediately tried to eat a pine cone. These kids live in a world where imagination and reality are stitched together with thread made of dirt and survival instinct. Historically, the odds weren't in their favour. Childhood mortality rates on the frontier were stomach-churning. Disease, accidents, starvation, infection, every year was a coin toss. A cut could turn into sepsis. A winter fever could turn deadly overnight. Mothers buried children more often than anyone wants to admit, and yet they kept having them. Because children weren't just part of the dream, they were the dream. A family meant help, a future, a reason to keep pushing when everything else said to stop. You watch as Sarah's boy pulls a worm from the garden and presents it to his sister like a gift. She screams. He laughs. She throws a clump of dirt at his head. He ducks and lands in the firewood pile. It's chaos. But it's also life. Real life. Messy and loud and human. Out here, that's as close to joy as you get. And yet, childhood wasn't all labour and horror. There were moments, good ones. Kids played games, homemade ones, simple ones. They whittled dolls out of twigs, tossed stones into Huntington patterns, invented elaborate sagas about raccoons becoming sheriffs. Music was a big deal. A harmonica, a fiddle, even just someone who could clap in rhythm became the highlight of a week. Storytelling was currency, tales passed down around the fire. Half true, half fantasy, but all important. Sarah tells you her kids have never seen a town, never seen more than 3 buildings in one place. They think neighbours means the couple who live 10 miles away. They don't know what the store looks like. They've never eaten candy. And I don't plan to tell them, she says with a grin. Why give them something to miss? She leans in then, voice lower. But I worry, all the time, if they get sick. If something happens when I'm not looking, I can't protect them from everything. And out here, she pauses, out here, everything wants to hurt them. And she's not wrong. Between the wildlife, the weather, the tools, the fire, and the terrain itself, the whole landscape is basically a death trap designed by someone who thought parenting should be more exciting. One misstep, one rusty nail, one infected scratch is all it takes. You walk home that night thinking about your own childhood, about how much of it was soft, controlled, safe, and how easy it is to take that for granted. You remember complaining about broccoli. These kids don't even know what that is. You remember skipping homework to watch a show. These kids are learning to butcher animals before they lose their baby teeth. And here's a fringe fact to chew on. Some frontier kids grew up so wild they couldn't adjust when their families eventually moved to town. They preferred the woods, the quiet, the freedom, even the danger. Civilization felt suffocating, structured, fake. There are letters from parents describing sons who ran back into the hills, who refused to be tamed, who became more forest than man. Back in your cabin you sit by your fire and picture Sarah's kids 20 years from now. What they'll remember, what they'll carry, what scars they'll have, physical and otherwise. You wonder if they'll even know how different their lives were. Or if they'll think everyone else is soft. The fire pop. You look down at your own calloused hands, at your chipped nails, at the streak of soot across your shirt that's been there for 4 days. Maybe they won't be wrong. The wind howls tonight. Not a casual breeze or a comforting rustle, but a full-throated shriek that wraps around your cabin like it's trying to peel it open. The walls groan with every gust, the logs creaking in protest. You sit near the fire, hunched in your blanket, listening to the eerie choir of branches clawing at the roof and rafters. It's a night that feels like it wants to be remembered, and not in a good way. The lantern flickers low, casting long, twitching shadows across the floor. Every so often the firewood pops with a sharp crack that makes your nerves jump. You remind yourself out loud that it's just wind, just trees, just noise, but your voice sounds foreign in the cabin, too loud and it doesn't belong, the kinds of sound that draws attention from things that should stay sleeping. That's when you find yourself doing something you haven't done in years. Praying. Not a fancy prayer, not even a proper one. Just a whispered plea that the roof holds, that the fire stays lit, that nothing out there decides tonight is the night it wants in. You don't even know who you're praying to. Doesn't really matter, does it? Out here, anything that listens is welcome. God's spirits, ancestors, a particularly friendly squirrel, if it's watching and it has the power to not let you freeze to death, you'll take it. Faith and superstition are funny things on the frontier. You don't expect to lean on them. Back in town, you might have rolled your eyes at talk of ghosts, hexes, and guardian angels. But out here, alone in the dark, wind screaming through the gaps in the walls, You start to understand why people keep charms around their necks and horseshoes nailed above doors. It's not about logic. It's about hope. It's about giving shape to the chaos. You remember Sarah mentioning something last week, offhand, like it wasn't even a big deal. "Don't whistle after dark," she'd said, handing you a jar of pickled beans. "It draws things in." You'd laughed. She hadn't. And now, sitting here with the wind howling like it's got your name memorized, you haven't whistled since. It's not just her either. Everyone out here has little rules. Don't leave boots upside down. Don't sweep dirt out after sunset. Don't look too long into the forest fog. They're not written down, but they're remembered. Shared over fires, muttered under breath. You don't ask why, you just follow them. Outside, something knocks against the wall. Not hard, just enough. You freeze, hold your breath, then slowly, too slowly, move toward the window and peek out. Nothing. Just branches, swaying. But your gut tells you something was there. Historically, this isn't new. The frontier was full of folklore. Every culture that touched this land left behind stories. Some terrifying, some oddly beautiful. Native tribes had ancient tales about spirits tied to rivers, forests and animals. European settlers brought their own batch of ghosts and omens. Mix them all together with hunger, isolation, and the occasional fever dream, and you get a melting pot of spooky that makes Halloween look like amateur hour. One story you heard in town still haunts you. About a traveller who wandered off trail and came back weeks later, barefoot, eyes wide, whispering about shapes in the trees that walked without footsteps. He refused to go into the woods again. He eventually left the territory entirely. Another tale told of a woman who claimed her dead husband spoke to her through the wind. She answered every night, until one morning her cabin door was found wide open, and she was gone. You tell yourself these are just stories, just ways to explain the inexplicable. But when the wind hisses around your chimney like a whisper with teeth, your brain doesn't care about logic. It cares about survival. It cares about firelight and closed doors and the small circle of safety you've carved out in a wilderness that does not care whether you live or die. Still, there's something else here too, something quieter, older. A kind of reverence. The darkness isn't just scary, it's sacred. This land lived long before you showed up, and it will live long after you're gone. You're not conquering it. You're renting space, and the lease is fragile. On nights like this, you remember that. You place a sprig of sage near the window, not because you think it'll help, but because Sarah said it might. You hum to yourself, tuneless and soft, just to break the silence, just to tell the dark that you're still here. And after a while, the wind starts to die down. The shrieking fades to murmurs. The cabin settles. Your breath evens out. You don't sleep right away. You sit there for a long time, eyes on the coals, blanket pulled to your chin, listening to the way the world exhales. Eventually, the fear slips into something else. Stillness. Not the threatening kind, just quiet, a deep, respectful quiet. You crawl into your bedroll, eyes still wide, ears twitching at every sound. But there's comfort now, not certainty. Never that, but a little peace. You didn't whistle. You kept the fire alive. You offered your whispered prayer. And tonight that was enough. You wake to scratching, not the distant rustle of wind in the trees or the innocent scurry of a chipmunk playing tag with gravity. No, this is closer. This is personal. The sound of tiny claws against wood, desperate and deliberate. You sit up slowly, eyes darting to the corner of the cabin where the floorboards shift ever so slightly, and for one terrifying second you imagine some demonic squirrel tunneling in for revenge. But no, it's worse. It's rats. You spring from the bedroll like your blanket was on fire, grabbing your boot as a makeshift weapon. The rats scatter, 3 of them at least, slipping through cracks you didn't even know were there. They've chewed into your stores again. Your last handful of beans is now a mushy, tooth-marked mess. The sack of flour, punctured and leaking like a dying pillow. You're not just mad, you're insulted. You've been outwitted by something with a brain the size of a walnut and a tail like a piece of living rope. Welcome to pest life on the frontier. Rats, mice, weevils, lice, fleas, out here. Everything with more than 4 legs wants to live in your bed, eat your food, or lay eggs somewhere you don't want eggs. There is no escape, no walls tight enough, no bags secure enough, no shame deep enough when you realise you've just eaten bread that was probably nibbled by something earlier that day. You pick up the flour sack, now sagging like a deflated dream, and mutter threats at the floorboards. You know it's useless. You've patched that hole 3 times. They always come back. They're like furry little tax collectors, taking their cut of everything you harvest, store or cook, and they never pay rent. Then there are the bugs. Oh, the bugs. In summer they're relentless. Mosquitoes swarm like flying syringes, each one with a vendetta. Black flies go for your eyes, ears, anything soft and exposed. Chiggers bite you in places you can't reach. And ticks, those delightful little vampires, latch on with no warning and leave you scratching for days. You've pulled them from your legs, your armpits, your scalp, once from your belly button, and each time feels like a small betrayal. You once found one on your tongue. You try not to think about it. You boil your clothes whenever you can, soap them, smoke them, hang them in the sun. Doesn't matter. Lice still show up like they got your address forwarded. At night the itching starts, scalp, wrists, back of the neck. You scratch until you bleed, then you scratch some more, and you wonder, how did anyone out here ever feel clean? Spoiler, they didn't. There's a diary from a settler you read once, someone who crossed west with a wagon train. She wrote, "We are all infested. We comb our hair in the morning and set fire to the combings. It helps little." That line has stuck with you, especially on nights when you're picking fleas off your socks and considering burning the entire cabin down just to start over. Then there's the outhouse, or, in your case, the hole with aspirations. It's primitive, unpleasant, and a breeding ground for every fly this side of hell. You've learned to visit it quickly, keep your mouth closed, and never, ever forget to check for snakes. You once had a close encounter with a nest of wasps underneath the seat. That was the day you considered becoming a tree-dwelling hermit. And if the bugs and rats don't get you, the germs might. Dysentery is the big one, the quiet killer. You drink the wrong water, eat food that's turned, or just fail to wash your hands properly, which is harder than it sounds when soap is homemade and half your water goes to not freezing to death. And accidentally you're doubled over in pain, dehydrated, and considering making your will out to the squirrel who watches you through the window every morning. Another day you hear Sarah screaming. You run over, rifle in hand, only to find her kicking a raccoon out of her kitchen. It's covered in flour, looks completely unbothered, and scampers off with a chunk of jerky in its mouth like it owns the place. Her kids think it's hilarious. She doesn't. You both laugh later, but not because it's funny, because you're too exhausted to do anything else. Here's a fringe fact for you. Some frontier families kept weasel skulls over the doorway to ward off vermin. No one really knows if it worked, but it made them feel better, and out here that's half the battle. Others sprinkled ash or pepper around doorways, or hung dried herbs like mint or wormwood. Again, no guarantees, but it gave the illusion of control. And there's the bigger debate that still pops up in dusty journals and modern historical arguments. Did the average frontier settler even care about cleanliness? Some argue yes, deeply so, even if their standards were different. Others say no, that function outweighed freshness, and as long as you weren't visibly oozing, you were fine, based on your current state, itchy, scratched, slightly smelly, and being bullied by rodents. You'd say the truth lies somewhere in between. By afternoon, you're back on your hands and knees, stuffing moss into holes in the floor, setting up a new food shelf that hangs from the ceiling, because apparently rats don't climb. Ha! Just kidding, yes they do. And placing your boots upside down on sticks because spiders have made them home too many times. Every squeak, every scuttle sends your nerves twitching. At one point you stare at your cabin and just laugh. You're filthy tired, and your home is being slowly overrun by a league of tiny creatures who do not pay taxes. You swat a fly away from your face, stand in the doorway and yell, "This is my house!" A squirrel runs away. That's something. That night you sleep with one boot on just in case, and when you wake to find a mouse curled in your food bowl you sigh. Deeply, because of course it is. Out here you're never truly alone. Something's always crawling. You never thought you'd get excited over a single horseshoe, but here you are, holding one up in the sunlight like it's some lost relic from a forgotten age. It's worn, rusted, slightly bent at one edge, but it's a real piece of iron, and that makes it about as valuable as gold out here. You found it buried under a rock near the trailhead, probably tossed aside by someone whose wagon horse lost it mid-journey and just kept limping along. Their loss, your ridiculous treasure. Because out here, everything has value, especially when cash is as rare as a good night's sleep. Frontier economics isn't money first, it's trade first, barter. Deals sealed with a nod and a handshake, or sometimes a squint and a "don't screw me." Coins are scarce. Paper bills are laughable unless you're near a real town, and even then no one trusts them to hold their value longer than the firewood you stacked last week. What actually counts? horseshoes, lantern oil, good rope, salt, ammo. A handful of coffee beans can buy you a warm meal and a story depending on the company. You remember your first lesson in frontier economics vividly. It was your second week out here. You wandered into that tiny trading post 20 miles away, the one with the door that won't close and the smell of pickled everything. You brought a bag of foraged mushrooms, a half-dried rabbit pelt, and a smile. You left with 1 tin of coffee, 3 nails, and a bruised ego. The storekeeper, Wilbur, who wears his beard like a blanket, barely looked at your goods before grunting, "That's dinner, not payment." Lesson learned. Just because something took you hours to acquire doesn't mean it's worth much to anyone else. Today you plan to trade the horseshoe. Sarah needs nails, and she's got a jar of actual molasses she hinted about the other day. Molasses! You haven't tasted anything sweet in weeks that didn't come from a berry you weren't sure was poisonous. You clean the horseshoe gently, polish it on your shirt, and wrap it in a scrap of cloth like it's a sacred artifact. Then you make your way to her place, heart humming like you're about to pull off a great heist. Sarah inspects the horseshoe like a jeweller with a magnifying glass. Her son watches from a stump chewing on a stick because apparently that's what passes for candy. Finally she nods, disappears inside and returns with the jar. It's half full, golden brown. You don't even wait, you dip a finger in and taste it. It's thick, sticky, sweet. Your brain lights up like you just kissed an angel. You blink hard. She laughs. "This your first sugar in a while?" You nod. "I think my tongue forgot how to process happiness." She wraps the jar in paper and hands it over. "Don't waste it. That's the last I've got till spring." And you don't. That night you stir a spoonful into your sad root mash and it transforms from dirt-flavoured regret to warm, nostalgic sorrow with a hint of dessert. It's the best thing you've eaten since arriving. The trade sets off a chain reaction. A few days later, you're back at Wilbur's post with 3 rabbit pelts and a bag of salt you pried from a neighbour after helping patch their roof. Wilbur grunts, but this time you walk out with 3 candles, a sewing needle and a chunk of beeswax. The needle alone feels like a victory. You stitch up a torn sleeve that's been flapping in the wind for days. The beeswax becomes fire starter, lip balm and window cork, all in 1 week. Out here, value isn't tied to price tags, it's tied to need. A broken axe is worthless in town, but priceless if your tree falls wrong. A rusty tin cup might be all someone has to drink from. A sack of flour is sacred. Trade isn't just commerce, it's community. It's built on trust, reputation and grudges that last longer than winter. And there's an unspoken code to it all. You don't gouge someone who's down on their luck. You don't lie about the quality of what you've got because it will come back to you. And if you cheat someone, you better not need their help the next time your chimney collapses or your leg gets broken by a mule with attitude. Most deals are sealed with handshakes, nods, or just the silent agreement that both of you are too tired to argue. There's a fringe element to this too. Barter rituals. Some folks refuse to accept trades on Sundays. Others insist on gifting before trading as a kind of charm for fairness. Sarah always makes you drink tea before discussing terms, says it calms everyone's judgment. One woman you met last month, Ruthie, demands you sit down before she talks price. Nobody makes smart deals standing up, she told you, while feeding her goat what looked like an old bonnet. And of course there's a running scholarly debate, because there always is, about whether frontier economies were truly fair. Some argue they were deeply exploitative, with the rich hoarding essentials and the poor scraping by with whatever garbage they could scrounge. Others claim it was a golden age of practical economics, where nothing went to waste and people traded what they had with an honest sense of balance. You've seen both. You've made trades that felt like a hug, and trades that felt like a mugging. You start keeping a list in the back of your journal, items you need, items you can trade, items that might come in handy if you're desperate. A broken hinge, an extra spoon. That weird doll head you found under a log that might actually be cursed, but could also fetch a laugh from someone with too many kids and not enough humour. One night you trade an extra rabbit pelt for a single candle stub and a story. The candle lasts 3 nights. The story about a haunted pine tree that walks when the moon is full lasts a lot longer. You find yourself repeating it. Around the fire, to Sarah's kids, to yourself on cold nights, in a world where everything breaks, burns, or gets eaten by raccoons. A good story might be the most durable currency of all. You sit by the fire that night, molasses still warm on your tongue, the horseshoe now nailed above your cabin door. Superstition maybe, but it feels right. The wind rattles the shutters, and your stomach is actually full. You don't have money, you barely have pants without holes in them, but for once you feel like a rich man, All it cost you was a little rusted iron and a willingness to trade. The first sign that something's wrong is the yelling. Not the everyday kind of shouting that comes with missing chickens or children falling into woodpiles. This is different. It's rough, raw, and close enough that it slices through the trees like a jagged blade. You freeze halfway through chopping kindling, the hatchet suspended in the air. You glance toward the path that leads east, the one that winds past Sarah's homestead and deeper into the woods. The yelling comes again, louder this time, more like a bellow than a call. Definitely male, definitely not happy. You drop the hatchet. Within minutes, you're jogging toward the sound, rifle slung across your back, heart hammering a little faster than it should. The ground is still slick from last night's rain, and your boots suck at the mud like they're trying to hold you back. The closer you get, the louder it becomes. Shouting, stomping, the crack of something wooden breaking. You slow down as Sarah's cabin comes into view and duck behind a tree. Peter is home, and Peter is very, very drunk. You don't need to hear the slurred words to know it's bad. His voice booms through the clearing. Layered with rage and something else, defeat maybe. You see Sarah standing by the door, arms crossed, face flat like stone. Her son sits in the dirt a few feet away, holding his sister, both eyes wide, both silent. Peter kicks a bucket, throws something, probably a plate, and then storms around the side of the cabin, muttering under his breath. You step out, slowly. "Peter," you call, not too loud. He turns, glassy-eyed, jaw set like he's chewing nails. You've seen this kind of drunk before. Not the jolly kind, not the weepy kind, the mean kind. The kind that drinks because everything inside is broken and they want the outside to match. His eyes flick to you, and for a second no one breathes. Then Sarah speaks. He's not staying. Peter spins toward her, fists clenched, but she doesn't flinch. She doesn't raise her voice either, just repeats it with that same terrifying calm. He's not staying. Peter looks back at you. What, you come here to play hero? You shrug. Just came to make sure no one burns the place down. It's not the smartest thing to say, but it's what comes out. He takes a step forward, then stops, sways, and looks back at his family. Something breaks in his face, not rage, not shame, just emptiness. He mutters something too low to catch, stumbles past you and disappears into the woods, feet dragging. You don't follow. After he's gone, the silence hangs like smoke. Sarah doesn't cry, she doesn't say thank you either. She just picks up the broken pieces of whatever he threw, calls to the kids, and disappears into the cabin. You walk back to your place in silence. This is frontier law. The thing about living out here is that the law is a suggestion at best. Town is too far. The sheriff, if there is one, is usually 2 days late and 3 days drunk. There are no patrols, no deputies, no handcuffs or warrants or courtrooms. Justice, when it happens, is personal, handled with fists, guns, gossip, or the slow grind of isolation. Disputes between neighbours are settled with glares, cold shoulders, and sometimes axes through fences. Yet you heard about one man who salted another's field out of spite. Another shot his neighbour's dog and left the carcass hanging on a tree. And if things get real bad, someone disappears. No one asks too many questions. Not because they don't care, but because they don't want to be next. You've been warned. Pick your battles, pick them carefully. Frontier justice isn't about fairness, it's about balance. About making sure no one pushes too far, about quiet understandings and unwritten rules. There's a kind of moral economy here. Do right by others, and they'll have your back. Cheat, steal, or hurt, and you're out, cast out, maybe worse. Which is why Sarah's decision is so huge. Turning Peter away. That's not just personal, it's public. Everyone will know, some will blame her, some will call her brave. Others will watch closely to see what happens next. And now you're part of it too, whether you meant to be or not. That night you don't sleep well. You lie on your cot, rifle next to you, listening for footsteps, just in case. Because Peter might be gone for good, or he might not. And if he comes back, there's no badge out here, no backup, just you, a loaded gun, and the moral question of what it means to defend someone else's family when the law is 100 miles away. Here's a quirky historical fact. Some frontier towns created their own justice committees, unofficial groups of locals who enforced rules through sheer numbers and threats. They'd hang a man for stealing a horse, exile a troublemaker, or break a fence-sitter's wagon, just to make a point. Mob justice was common, and terrifying, because sometimes the mob got it wrong. There's still debate about how effective this system was. Some historians argue it kept order in lawless places, others call it vigilante terror. You lean toward both, because while it's true that justice out here is fast, it's also sloppy. Personal grudges can look a lot like justice when no one's writing anything down. Over the next few days, you check in on Sarah. Quietly, she's rebuilding. Peter doesn't return. The kids are quieter than usual. The cabin feels heavy with unspoken words. You bring them salt, help patch the door, and then leave. She never says thank you, she just nods. And out here, that's enough. You don't talk to anyone else about what happened. Not Elias, if he passes through. Not the old couple to the east. Not Wilbur at the post, because talking spreads stories. And stories invite judgment. And judgment out here leads to action. Sometimes right, sometimes wrong. Instead, you build a new fence around your cabin. Not out of fear, just preparedness. You keep your rifle close and your knife sharpened, because justice when it comes won't knock politely. And you sleep with one eye open now, because the law is too far away, and you are the law. The letter arrives like a ghost, unexpected, weathered, and smelling faintly of dust and pipe smoke. Wilbur from the trading post hands it to you with a shrug, muttering something about finally catching up with you. You turn it over in your hands, stunned by the simple weight of it. A real letter, ink on paper, folded with care. There's a name scrawled in a handwriting you haven't seen in months, maybe longer. It's from your sister, the one back east, the one who swore she'd never understand why you left but promised to write anyway. You had half convinced yourself she never would. You hold it for a while before you open it, because out here, news moves slower than the wind through molasses. Months pass between words. You send letters hoping they survive rivers, rough hands, and weather. You never really expect an answer. Mail is a luxury, a miracle, a roll of the dice. So when it comes, when a piece of your old life slips through the cracks, it hits harder than it has any right to. The paper is wrinkled, the ink smudged in places, but the words are clear enough. She talks about the city, about their new neighbours, about a bakery on the corner with cinnamon rolls you can smell from 2 blocks away. She asks how you're eating, how you're sleeping, whether you still have all your fingers. She says she worries about you every time it snows. You laugh aloud at that part. The kind of laugh that stings, because what can you write back? That last week you boiled the same root 3 times and called it a stew? That your socks are now more patch than fabric? That a squirrel died in your chimney last month and made the whole place smell like guilt? You fold the letter carefully and place it inside your coat, close to your chest. You'll write back tonight, maybe, if the ink hasn't frozen and your candle holds out. The truth is, news is just as fragile out here as people are. And letters aren't the only thing that travels slowly. Gossip too moves on its own strange current. It's stitched together through half-heard stories, suspicious glances, and whispered exchanges between strangers on the trail. Someone passes through, shares a few details about a cabin fire 2 valleys over, and by the time the story gets to you, it's morphed into something involving a jealous lover, a stolen cow, and 3 ghosts. No one knows what's real, but that doesn't stop the story from spreading. You learned early to trust your ears, but doubt the details. Sarah told you once about a widow who turned out to have 2 husbands, neither of whom had actually died, just wandered off to find better fishing. You heard about a man who struck gold, went to town to celebrate, and never came back. Some say he ran off with the money. Others say he never had any. Either way, someone built a saloon in his name and now it's part of the legend. Even ghost towns have reputations. You rode past one once, a cluster of sun-bleached buildings leaning into the wind like they were too tired to stand straight. No signs of life, but the moment you mentioned it at the post, Wilbur and 3 others started telling overlapping tales about curses, buried treasure, and a man who lost his mind trying to count all the rats. You didn't stay long enough to verify. Some places are best left to their own stories. Sarah hears the rumours too. A few days after the letter arrives, she mentions hearing that a new family is settling upriver. 4 kids, 2 oxen, and a grandfather who talks to trees. No one knows where they came from, no one knows if they'll stay. But already people are speculating about what kind of neighbours they'll be. Friendly, strange, dangerous. Out here, reputation gets built before people do. Your name travels faster than your boots. You help someone dig a well and 3 cabins away, you're a hero. You lose your temper once at a trading post and for months, folks side-eye you like you're one bad day away from becoming a headline. You're careful with your words now, measured. Every sentence could become someone else's story. You've learnt to smile when you mean stay out of my business. You nod instead of argue. You agree with things you don't believe in because out here, harmony matters more than honesty, at least most days. But not all stories are bad. Sometimes the news that reaches you lifts more than it weighs. You hear about a birth 2 homesteads over, a healthy baby girl born on the coldest night of the month. You hear about a couple who finally finished their 2-room cabin after 3 years of single-walled misery. You hear someone caught a fish the size of a dog. Might be exaggerated, but you don't care. It gives the forest a different kind of life. You sit by your fire that night, pen in hand, staring at the blank page that will become your reply. What do you tell someone back east? That you've nearly died 3 times? That your hands are calloused to the point of numbness? That you've found joy in the shape of molasses spoon? You write slowly, carefully, folding the truth between softer details. You talk about the stars, about how quiet the woods get just before a storm. You mention Sarah's kids, the raccoon thief, the new trap you designed that almost caught something. You add a joke about how your hat now doubles as a soup bowl in emergencies. And then, just before signing your name, you write something that surprises even you. I miss you, but I'm where I need to be. It's true. Not because it's easy. Not because it's kind. But because out here, even with the hunger, the wind, the pests, and the silence, you are alive in a way you never were before. You seal the letter with wax and place it on the mantle to dry. Someone will come through eventually. You'll pay them to carry it to town, maybe it'll get there. Maybe not. But you wrote it. And sometimes that's all a message needs to be. You're halfway through chewing a piece of cold, over-salted rabbit when it hits you. This moment right here might actually be kind of pleasant. You blink, surprised at the thought. You're sitting outside your cabin, boots off, feet in the grass, back against the warm wall, sun on your face. The air smells faintly of pine and smoke, and the bugs aren't biting for once. A gentle breeze rustles the trees, not in that we're about to collapse on your house way, but more like nature humming to itself while you try to enjoy your dinner. And somehow, despite the chipped enamel cup in your hand and the slightly rubbery texture of the meat, everything feels okay. Not amazing, not like you just got a massage amazing, but okay in the way that your bones are warm and your belly's not empty and your hands aren't bleeding from chopping logs. And out here, that's rare enough to count as joy. You sip water and lean your head back, eyes half closed, and think, this must be what they meant by simple pleasures, not the kind you schedule or buy or post about later. Just moments, quiet ones. Ones that sneak up on you between all the pain and noise and endless soul-draining effort of staying alive. Like the first time you made fire from damp twigs and a bad attitude, or the morning you found your snare occupied by an actual rabbit instead of a rock and a mocking trail of paw prints, or the time you and Sarah laughed so hard over a squirrel getting stuck in her flour barrel that she snorted tea out of her nose. Little victories, small wins, moments where, for just a breath, the frontier didn't feel like it was trying to kill you. You think about how back east joy was louder. Parties, parades, plates full of food, bells and carriages and polished shoes. Out here it's quieter. It sneaks in between chores. It hides inside a warm cup. It's the feeling of dry socks after a week of swamp foot. It's waking up and realizing you didn't hear any scratching in the walls all night. It's cutting into a turnip and finding it's not rotten. And the stars. Don't even get started on the stars. When the sun drops and the fire's just aglow and the forest settles into its night breathing, you look up and feel like you're staring into forever. You can't name half of what you see, but that doesn't matter. It's the sheer depth of it. The way the night sky stretches over you like a giant dark ocean filled with pinpricks of light and possibility. You feel tiny and lucky all at once, like you're standing on the edge of something sacred. Even in winter, when everything hurts and your breath hangs in the air like a warning, there are moments of strange beauty, like the sound of snow falling when the world is utterly still, like the way frost coats every surface in a delicate shimmer that makes your cabin look briefly like something out of a fairy tale. And if you squint real hard, you can pretend the icicles hanging from your roof aren't trying to impale you. Joy here is rarely convenient. It doesn't arrive wrapped in comfort. It shows up with splinters and bruises and a few cracked ribs, but when it comes, it matters, because it means you're still alive enough to feel it. Even the food, when it works, has its moments. That one time you actually seasoned a stew properly and didn't burn it to the bottom of the pot, or the time Sarah shared a slice of flatbread so warm and fluffy it felt like cheating. The molasses spoonfuls, rationed and reverent. The thrill of finding wild onions that didn't turn your stomach inside out. Those moments stick. And the people, the weird, stubborn, wonderful people. Like Elias, who once traded you a whole set of nails for a single fish, and then told you a story about a talking fox that probably wasn't a joke. Or Wilbur, who runs the post with one eye, 2 working teeth, and a deeply suspicious love of pickled beets, but somehow always has the one item you thought no one could possibly still have, like a spool of thread or cinnamon. Even Sarah, who still doesn't say thank you, but will leave a bowl of stew on your porch when your firewood pile looks low. Her kids have turned wild in the best way, building forts in tree hollows, inventing their own names for birds, and occasionally tying your boots together when you're not looking. They're tough, hilarious, and completely unbothered by the idea that joy needs to be earned. They find it in everything. You envy them for that. Sometimes you lie awake at night and wonder if you'll ever leave this place. If you'll return to the east, walk down cobbled streets, eat food you didn't cook, sleep in a bed that doesn't sag or squeak or contain a family of mice. But you know, deep down, that if you did, you'd miss this. Not the struggle, but the meaning that comes with it. How every scrap of joy feels like a stolen treasure, like it matters. There's a fringe historical fact that sticks in your mind. Some settlers, after making it west, chose not to go back, even when offered the chance. Even when they had the money or the invitation, they stayed. Not because they loved the hardship, but because they discovered a kind of peace in the simplicity. A closeness to something raw and real, and far older than the cities they left behind. You get it now. That night, as the fire dies down and the stars press in closer, you sit on the cabin step with a fresh cup of warm water and nothing left to do. No emergency, no splinters yelling, just the sound of the wind and your own breathing. You exhale, slow and steady, and for just a moment the world doesn't need anything from you. It just is, and that's enough. You're just about to strike the flint when you hear it, a distant muffled moo. You freeze, squinting out through the half-open cabin door, wondering if the fatigue has finally evolved into full-blown hallucination. But there it is again, low, slow, undeniably bovine. You mutter something under your breath, drop the flint and grab your boots. You haven't seen a cow in weeks, months maybe, and the sudden reappearance of one on your doorstep feels less like a blessing and more like a very large, inconvenient mystery. Sure enough, you find her about 50 yards from your cabin, a big brown, wide-eyed cow chewing calmly on your garden like it's the buffet at an inn she wasn't invited to. Your garden's already struggling, bless its patchy, wilted little heart, but now it's being annihilated by this large, opinionated grazer. She blinks at you as if to say, "Well, if you didn't want me to eat it, you shouldn't have planted it so deliciously." "Where did you come from?" you ask. She says nothing, just continues chewing, and so begins your unexpected journey into livestock management, a topic you never imagined you'd have to care about, but suddenly desperately need to understand. So there's no brand on her, no tag, no rope, nothing. Just a very real cow in a very real garden, absolutely obliterating your onions. You do your best to usher her away, waving your arms, shouting, even tossing a pebble at her haunch, which she ignores with a look of supreme indifference. Eventually she meanders off on her own, heading toward the creek like she owns the place. You follow, bewildered. The next day she's still there, drinking from the creek, swatting flies with her tail, occasionally staring at your cabin like she's thinking of moving in. You start to suspect she might be lost, or worse, abandoned, and while your logical brain tells you to find her owner, your stomach is already making calculations about milk, butter, and possibly steak. Because out here, livestock is more than just property, it's currency. A cow is walking wealth, milk, cheese, hide, meat, manure for fertilizing. If you play your cards right, she could mean the difference between surviving the winter and chewing your boot leather again. But of course, this is the frontier. Nothing is ever simple. You ask around, you hike to Wilbur's post and describe the cow. He shrugs. Might be the Thompsons, or the Bakers, or maybe she just wandered off from a drive. Ain't seen no cattlemen come through lately though. Translation. She's probably yours now. If she stays. You check with Sarah too. She stifles a grin. You name her yet? You scowl. She's not mine. Hedda tell her that. And here's the thing, they're right. Possession on the frontier is often about who's willing to take responsibility. If something wanders onto your land and no one claims it, and you put in the effort to care for it, maintain it, feed it, it's yours. The law is vague and distant and mostly theoretical. Justice comes in the form of handshakes, grudges, and whose fence the animal was behind when the argument starts. So you build a fence. A terrible one, honestly. It sags, it leans, one corner just sort of gives up halfway through construction. But it's something. You even manage to find a bit of rope and fashion a crude halter, which the cow allows you to slip on after only 3 full tantrums and a headbutt to the stomach. You name her Mercy, because you figure if she's going to bless or curse your life, you might as well give her a name that keeps your pride in check. Mercy, for her part, seems entirely unimpressed by your efforts. She breaks the fence twice in the first week, kicks over a water bucket, tries to eat your bootlaces, but she also gives milk. A little milk, not much, and only after some clumsy trial and error involving a borrowed stool, sore knuckles, and the distinct realization that cows do not care about your feelings. But it's milk all the same. You've never tasted anything so pure. Rich, warm, a little grassy, but it fills your belly like gold. You mix it with some crushed berries, and for a moment you forget your cracked hands and aching back. Mercy watches as you drink, chewing her cud like she's judging your technique. There's a historical footnote that floats into your mind. Many settlers considered their livestock family, not in the fluffy pet the dog on the head way, but in the essential way. Livestock were survival. If the cow died, you died. Period. So they were valued, protected, even mourned when lost, and sometimes, like now, accidentally adopted. Of course, there's also a fringe tale you remember hearing in town, is a man took in a stray ox, fattened it up for winter, only to have a group of riders show up 2 months later with a claim, a badge, and a very serious rifle. Apparently the ox had a name, a brand, and a bounty. The man ended up giving the ox back and part of his food stores. The ox looked smug the entire time. You keep this story in mind as you build a slightly better fence. Mercy settles in. You carve out a spot in the shed, pad it with straw, hang a rusty bell by the door like you're running some tiny hay-scented hotel. You even find yourself talking to her while you work, complaining about the weather, reading aloud from your letters, asking if she thinks the strange mushrooms near the creek are edible. She never answers, just snorts occasionally, but she listens, and in the growing loneliness of late summer, that's enough. One evening you spot a figure on the horizon, a rider. You tense up instantly, rifle within reach, brain replaying that ox story in a loop. But it's just Elias, waving lazily, beard in full rebellion against hygiene. He dismounts near the fence, eyes Mercy, and grins. Well, well, you rich now? Temporarily, he snorts. If she's not claimed, she's yours. How long do I have to wait before she's officially mine? Out here, if no one's shot you yet, it's official. You nod, heart easing just a bit. That night, you milk Mercy by lantern light, the crickets humming all around, the fire crackling inside. You sip the warm milk with cracked lips, watching the stars blink to life one by one, and you realize that somewhere between surviving and surrendering you've become a farmer. Kind of, at least until she kicks the pail over again. Rain hits the roof like 1,000 small hammers, each drop loud enough to rattle your teeth. It's been falling for hours now, maybe all night, turning the trail to the creek into a river of mud and old regrets. The cabin smells like wet socks and sour firewood, and Mercy, bless her stubborn heart, keeps mooing from the shed like she's composing an opera of passive aggression. You toss another log on the fire, not because you're cold, but because you're bored, and if you don't do something, then you're going to lose your mind and start naming the floorboards. Rain on the frontier is a whole different beast. It's not just weather, it's a test. A multi-day soul-grinding obstacle course that starts with puddles and ends with trench foot. Everything gets wet, not damp. Wet. Your socks squelch, your boots grow mushrooms, your bedding steams in the corner like it's trying to become soup, and the worst part? There's no escape, no dry porch, no backup shoes, no laundromat, just you, the dripping ceiling, and a growing suspicion that mold is developing sentience in the far corner of the cabin. You check the buckets, half full already, which is a good sign. Rainwater's your best bet for washing and cooking right now, unless you want to slosh down to the creek and wrestle with leeches again. You remind yourself that in the right light, this is romantic. A fire crackling, rain on the roof, a tin mug of warm milk in your hand. It could be cozy, if it weren't for the drafty walls, the smell of mildew, and the growing fear that your roof might collapse at any moment. You crawl into your coat and peek outside. The path's already gone, replaced by swamp, The fence is barely visible. Mercy's shelter leans sideways like it's thinking of taking a nap. She stares at you, drenched and miserable, and you mutter an apology, promising to reinforce the roof as soon as the weather clears. She blinks slowly, unimpressed. A drop of water falls directly onto your neck. You yelp. Mercy snorts. You retreat to the cabin. Frontier rain doesn't just inconvenience, it isolates. It cuts you off from everything. No trails, no viziers, no trips to the post. Even sound gets muffled under the constant percussion. You've never felt so far from the rest of the world as you do during a long storm. There's no real schedule anymore. You sleep when the fire dies. You wake when the thunder shakes the floor. You eat whenever your stomach growls loud enough to echo. The rhythm of survival shifts into a slower, sloppier tempo. You write letters you may never send. You carve small animals into firewood. You hum songs you only half remember. There's a strange comfort in the monotony, but also a creeping unease. Because while you're stuck inside playing checkers against your own bad memory, the world outside is moving. Water's rising, soil's shifting. If the rain keeps falling, something is going to break. You can feel it. And it's not just the land. It's you. Cabin fever is real. It doesn't hit all at once. It sneaks in. You start talking to yourself, narrating your own tasks. "Let's boil the roots, shall we?" you whisper, as if the pot's going to argue. You catch yourself smiling at the kettle. You assign personalities to your tools. The hatchet is angry. The tin cup is judgmental. The chair in the corner knows your secrets. You laugh, then stop, then laugh again, because what else can you do? Historically, prolonged isolation during harsh weather was one of the biggest psychological challenges on the frontier. Entire families would go weeks, months, without seeing another soul. There are stories of men walking out into snowstorms just to clear their heads, never to return. One woman reportedly taught her chickens to respond to Bible verses. Another spent a winter carving hundreds of tiny wooden hands and burying them around her property to keep the evil out. Not exactly behaviour you'd call stable, you understand now. Rain is slow madness. There's a debate among scholars about whether the romanticised view of frontier solitude is accurate. Some paint it as noble, time to reflect, to connect with nature, to find oneself. Others argue it was more like voluntary exile, with people slowly unravelling under the weight of their own thoughts. You, sitting here in your soggy socks carving your 16th tiny moose out of driftwood, definitely lean toward the unravelling camp. Still, there are moments. You hear the wind shift, feel the pressure drop, and just for a second, the rain lightens. You step outside just in time to catch a break in the clouds. A strip of sunlight slices through the grey, painting the treetops gold and casting steam up from the earth like breath. It's beautiful, quiet, almost holy. You close your eyes, let the warmth hit your face and breathe. Then the rain starts again. You stomp back inside and resume your now pointless task of drying your socks by the fire. You write another useless list. Things I will do when the rain stops. It includes such hits as fix Mercy's shelter, redig the trail trench, wash literally everything, and go for a walk and try not to cry. You add eat something that isn't a root in big letters and underline it twice. At some point, Sarah's oldest kid appears at your door, soaked and grinning, holding a tin of biscuits and a stick of hard cheese. Ma says you're probably going stir-crazy. You blink. How'd she know? He shrugs. You've been yelling at your porch, or... Fair enough. You trade him a spool of thread and a dry pair of gloves, and he's off again, vanishing into the fog like a very polite forest goblin. You sit with your cheese and your biscuit, chewing slowly, grateful beyond measure. Is the best thing you've eaten in days. You make it last, and with each bite the cabin feels just a little warmer. The storm doesn't break that night, but your mood does, just enough. You wrap yourself tight, sip from a cup of reheated tea, and listen to the rain like it's trying to tell you something old and rhythmic and kind. And for the first time all week, you don't mind being alone, not completely. You wake up to silence, the kind that makes you sit up straight, heartbeat already racing because something has to be wrong. No wind, no birds, no dripping from the roof, just the muffled quiet of a world holding its breath. You throw off the blanket, pull on your boots and step outside, and everything is white, not just a little snow dusting the trees white. Blinding, endless, apocalyptic white. Snow covers everything, your cabin, your fence, Mercy's shed, the trees, the sky, your soul. It's like the world forgot how to colour itself overnight. You can't see where the land ends and the sky begins. The snow's halfway up your shin already, and it's still falling thick and lazy like feathers from some furious skybird that exploded mid-flight. You curse softly, then louder when you realise your woodpile is half buried. The first snow always feels like a prank. One day you're gathering the last of the dry mushrooms, checking your traps, planning how many root stews you can choke down before your taste buds mutiny, and the next day, winter shows up uninvited, all bluster and silence, acting like it owns the place. You were almost ready. Almost. Now you're in it. You trudge through the drifts, stomping a trail toward the shed. Mercy is alive, bless her moody bovine heart, chewing slowly with a blanket of snow on her back like she doesn't even care. You check the lean-to roof, miraculously still standing, and top off her hay. She glances at you with a look that says, "I survived this before you were born," and you believe her. The snow hits harder as the morning drags on. You spend the next few hours digging paths to the outhouse, to the water barrel, to the cabin. Your shoulders ache. Your nose is numb. You've already fallen twice and muttered death threats at 2 trees. And then you step inside, stomp the snow from your boots, and realise this is just day one. Because surviving winter on the frontier isn't about being strong, it's about being relentlessly and ceaselessly stubborn. It's about knowing that the weather doesn't care if you're tired or hungry or one bad cough away from a fever dream. It's about waking up every morning and doing the same miserable chores in worse conditions than yesterday. You start rationing everything: candles, soap, food, hope. Firewood becomes religion. Every log is sacred. Every ember must be respected. You tend the fire like it's a nervous cat that could turn on you if you poke it wrong. You get up in the middle of the night just to feed it. You dream about it going out. You wake up sweating because the fire did go out, and now your teeth are chattering and you're wrapped in every scrap of cloth you own, wondering if frostbite has personality. You sleep less. You think more. Long, winding thoughts. About the life you left. About the one you're trying to build. About whether it's worth it. And just when you get close to an answer, your nose starts bleeding from the dry air and you forget what the question even was. Winter brings weird cravings. For food, yes. Cool warm bread, spiced meat, anything green. But also for sound, company, light. You catch yourself humming nonsense just to hear a human noise. You read the same 3 pages of an old book over and over. You talk to Mercy. A lot. She never answers, but you swear she's listening. Then come the blizzards. They arrive without warning. The sky turns grey, then blue-grey, then white, and then you're in it. Wind screaming, snow sideways, cabin shuddering, like it's thinking of giving up. You seal the windows with old rags and pray the roof holds. You sit on the floor, back to the wall, heart tight in your chest, wondering what would happen if something collapsed. If a tree fell. If the door blew open and never closed again. Because out here, in a storm, you're one mistake from becoming a memory. You remember Sarah telling you how her first winter nearly broke her. She lost a goat, half her roof, and most of her firewood in a single week. "I cried into a stew once," she'd said with a shrug. "Tasted better afterward." You get it now. There's a historical footnote you read once about how some settlers would spend winters completely isolated, speaking to no one for months. One man in particular carved stories into the walls of his cabin just to keep his mind from unravelling. Another supposedly married a broom. The debate among historians is whether those accounts were exaggerated or just uncomfortable truths that no one wanted to repeat. Either way, you start thinking about giving your axe a name. Still, not everything is miserable. There's a certain strange beauty to winter, even as it tries to kill you. The way the snow muffles every sound until even your own footsteps feel like whispers. The way icicles hang from the eaves like glass daggers in a cathedral. The way the stars seem brighter, closer, like they're peeking down just to make sure you haven't frozen in place. One night after a rare clear spell, you step outside and look up. The cold bites your skin, sharp and immediate, but the sky, oh, the sky. A sheet of diamonds. A canvas of fire. The northern lights flicker at the edge of the horizon, just faint enough to doubt, but real enough to make you stare for an hour. It's freezing. You can't feel your nose, and you don't care. Because out here, winter strips everything down. It shows you what matters, what lasts, what breaks. You're not just surviving weather. You're surviving yourself. The weak parts, the scared parts. The pieces of you that want to run, to quit, to go back to whatever warm, soft place you used to call home. And every day you don't, that's a win. You light your last full candle that night and read by its glow. You wrap yourself in your blanket and stare at the fire. You listen to the wind. You're still here. So's the snow. You nod to each other like old enemies who've decided not to fight tonight. It's the thaw that gets you, not the deep cold, not the blizzards or the ice that cracks your boots down the middle. It's the thaw, the slow, sloppy betrayal of winter retreating in fits and starts, dragging mud and rot behind it like some sullen house guest who overstayed their welcome. You wake one morning to find the roof dripping. Not leaking, just dripping in a slow, persistent rhythm that sounds like someone tapping their finger against your sanity. Outside, the snow is giving up the ghost. Patches of brown earth start peeking through like bruises on a fading memory. Your path to the outhouse is more swamp than trail now, and every step is a gamble. There's still a chill in the air, but it's thinner, lighter. And the wind, oh, the wind, no longer bites, it just nudges. You should feel relief, joy even, but instead you feel unsettled. Because the spring doesn't arrive on the frontier like some polite party guest bearing flowers and fresh strawberries. No, spring kicks in the door and tracks mud across your floor. It wakes everything up. Bugs, bears, old injuries, unfinished thoughts. Things start moving again, whether you're ready or not. Mercy is restless. Pacing in her pen, twitching at every sound. You spot birds circling high, insects crawling out from between the logs of your cabin. The garden looks like a battlefield, half thawed and trampled from her midwinter buffet. You stare at it, sigh, and start making plans again. Survival has seasons, winter is stillness, spring is work, and now it's time to rebuild. You start small, patching the fence, redigging the runoff trench, tearing down the part of the shed that collapsed under snow weight, and hammering it back into something vaguely vertical. You check the roof, plug gaps, sweep out mold. Everything smells like damp wood and sour ash. Your clothes are perpetually wet. You find mushrooms growing on a shelf. Every muscle protests. You've spent too long in winter's crouch and your body isn't ready to stand up again. Your hands crack from swinging tools. Your back reminds you daily that you're not 20 anymore, and maybe never were. You curse more, you grunt like a 90-year-old every time you bend down, but you move, because you have to, and as you move, the world moves with you. Sarah appears one morning with a sack of potato starts and her oldest son, dragging a broken hoe behind him, like a war trophy. She doesn't ask, just starts digging beside you. You plant in silence, shoulders brushing, boots deep in the mud. Her son disappears halfway through, presumably to go make mischief with a rock and some poor unsuspecting frog. She finishes her row and nods. Supposed to rain tomorrow, you nod back. Better put something in the ground before then. You work together until dusk. You don't talk about the winter. You don't talk about Peter. You don't talk about the future. Just seeds, soil, spacing, and that's enough. Elias wanders through a few days later, dragging a bag of cornmeal and a strange metal hook he found near the river. He talks about trapping, about a bear spotted north of the ridge, about some fool who tried to build a raft and ended up floating straight into a thorn thicket. You laugh harder than you should. It feels good to use your lungs again. He gives you a tin of coffee. You give him a few strips of jerky and half a bar of soap, the frontier's version of hugging. The trading post reopens before the trails are fully dry. Wilbur is there, grumpier than ever, muttering about inventory and mud and whatever crawled into my pantry and died. But he smiles when he sees you. A real smile. You trade what little you can. You pick up nails, some salt, a chunk of sugar so precious you swear you can hear angels singing when you hold it. People trickle back in, faces you haven't seen since before the snow fell. Thinner, wearier, but alive. You swap stories, compare frostbite scars, lie about how much food you had left in February. You hear who didn't make it. A quiet list passed around with solemn nods. You raise a tin mug in their memory, and you keep going. That's the thing no one tells you about frontier life. Not just the survival part, but the recovery. The slow, aching stretch of spring where your hands are always dirty, your clothes never quite dry, and everything you own smells vaguely like damp goat. You don't get a break. You just get different problems. Your cabin leaks in a new place. A raccoon chews through the last of your rope. The garden floods. You find mold in your flour sack. You get bitten by something you can't name. Mercy escapes for 2 hours and comes back with a smug look and someone else's cabbage in her teeth. You build a better fence. You keep going. And yet, amid the chaos, there are moments. The first green shoots poking through the soil like little fists. The sound of frogs returning to the creek. a breeze that smells for the first time in months alive. You sit on the porch one evening, firelight flickering behind you, stars overhead, and listen. Crickets, owls, wind through budding trees, the world waking up. There's a fringe story you once read about a settler who kept a journal for 15 years. He never described winter, just wrote, cold, work, dark. But every spring his entries exploded with details. Birds, flowers, soil texture, frog sounds, hope. It was like he came back to life every year, just in time to start over. You feel that now. You're exhausted. Your boots are falling apart. Your back might be permanently shaped like a question mark. But you made it. Through the silence, through the cold, through the gnawing doubt. You made it. And so did Mercy. And the kids. And so... You look at your scraped, mud-covered hands and think, maybe this was worth it. Not because it was beautiful, but because you earned it. Every breath, every step, every little moment of warmth in the middle of all the hard, the thaw might be ugly, but it means you lived. So here you are, 30 stories deep, calloused, mud-covered, emotionally sunburned, but standing, still breathing, still here. You've wandered the frontier through firewood and frostbite, fought off rodents with kitchen utensils, survived food that doubled as punishment, and stared down an isolation like it owed you rent. You've bartered with grumpy old men, milked a cow who might be smarter than you, and muttered at your ceiling while wondering if mold counts as a roommate. And somehow through all of that, you didn't just endure, you learned. You learned that frontier survival isn't about grit in a Hollywood sense. It's not about muscled men with perfectly dirt-streaked faces, or women with wild hair and flawless eyeliner chopping wood like it's a runway walk. No, real survival. It's a daily negotiation, 1,000 tiny decisions, a lot of bad smells, and a constant whisper in the back of your mind asking, why did I think this was a good idea again? But you also learned about beauty. Not the flashy kind, the stubborn kind. Beauty that shows up as a patch of green in a field of brown, the way your breath looks in the moonlight. The satisfaction of a fence that holds for more than 2 days. The quiet moment when everything doesn't suck. That rare, glorious feeling of sitting on your porch with warm food and thinking, I did this. I made it another day. And realizing that's enough. History remembers the frontier in broad strokes, big events, famous names, wagon trains, shootouts, gold rushes. But behind every one of those headlines was someone like you, muddy, tired, grumbling about root vegetables, but doing the damn work anyway. You're the real story. You who showed up every day to the unpredictable mess that was frontier life and said, okay, I'll try again. So if you ever wonder what frontier survival was really like, don't look at the polished monuments or the idealized paintings. Look at your scraped knuckles, your patched socks, your cracked mug full of lukewarm rabbit broth. That's it. That's the truth. Messy, raw, real. And now it's time to rest. So kick off your boots. Let the wind sing through the trees outside your cabin window. You've earned your quiet. You've earned your peace. Thanks for sticking around. Thanks for surviving.